I'm 28 years old, working really hard as a marketing executive, and dealing with a chronic illness that makes every day tough. But the hardest part of my life isn't that, it's my family. I have a younger sister, Clara, who's 25, and she's the favorite. My parents, John and Linda, absolutely adore her. As for me, I'm lucky if they even notice I'm there. Just last week, I finally got the promotion I've been working so hard for. I was excited, so I called home to share the news. Mom, guess what? I got the promotion. Oh, that's nice, dear, she replied. Did you hear Clara's boyfriend took her to that new fancy restaurant downtown? And just like that, my big moment was ignored. It's always like this. Then, the big news came. At a family dinner, Clara came in, waving her hand around. I'm engaged, Rick proposed. Everyone was cheering, Mom was crying, and Dad opened a bottle of champagne. Meanwhile, I was trying to hide my discomfort as pain from my illness flared up, not that anyone noticed. We need to start planning right away, Mom said excitedly. Miriam, clear your schedule, we'll need all the help we can get. I wanted to remind them about my health, but why bother? They'd just say I was being dramatic. The next few weeks were a blur of wedding catalogs, visiting venues, and endless talks about flowers and dresses. No one really asked my opinion, and when they did, it was quickly shut down. No, Miriam, we can't have lilies, Clara's allergic, remember? Of course, I remembered. I was the one who had rushed her to the hospital twice, because of it. But if I suggested something that didn't fit Clara's perfect wedding plans, it was immediately dismissed. One day, during one of those exhausting planning meetings, I decided to escape to my favorite coffee shop. That's where I met Ben. He noticed me struggling as I reached for my coffee. Are you okay? He asked, genuinely concerned. For once, someone was actually paying attention to me. We started talking, and I found out he was a doctor. When I mentioned my illness, he didn't brush it off or change the subject, he listened. We ended up chatting for hours. Ben became my safe space in the middle of all the wedding chaos. He understood my health issues, respected my job, and actually cared about my thoughts. It was a breath of fresh air. Then came the surprise. Clara approached me one day, beaming with excitement. Miriam, I want you to be my maid of honor. I was shocked. We hardly talked outside of family events, and now she wanted me to play such a big role in her wedding. Are you sure? We're not really close, Clara. Don't be silly, she said. You're my sister, it's tradition. And there it was, not because she valued our relationship, but because it was what people expected. I wanted to say no to Clara's offer to be her maid of honor, to protect myself from all the stress I knew it would bring, but the look on my parents' faces told me that saying no wasn't an option. So, here I am, about to take on the role of maid of honor for a sister who hardly knows me, in a wedding planned by parents who barely notice me. All this, while trying to keep up with my demanding job and manage my chronic illness. But at least I have Ben. Maybe things are finally looking up. Little did I know, the worst was still ahead. The big day arrived. I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, but I got out of bed anyway. I wasn't going to give anyone another reason to call me dramatic. I forced a smile as I helped Clara into her wedding dress. You look beautiful, I said, and I meant it. No matter what, she was still my sister. Thanks, she replied, barely looking at me. Just don't mess up your makeup crying during the ceremony. I want the photos to be perfect. The ceremony went by in a blur of white lace and teary vows. I stood there, holding my bouquet, feeling worse by the minute, but I kept it together. I had to. At the reception, I found Ben sitting at our table. You okay? He asked, holding my hand. You look pale. I'm fine, I lied. Just need to get through this. Suddenly, my mom appeared and grabbed my arm. Miriam, it's time for your speech. Don't embarrass your sister. I stood up, feeling a little unsteady as I made my way to the microphone. The room was spinning. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The last thing I remember was the floor rushing up toward me. I woke up to see Ben's worried face hovering above me. Miriam, can you hear me? He asked. What happened? I mumbled. You collapsed, Ben said. We need to get you to a hospital. That's when I heard my mother's sharp voice. Oh, for heaven's sake, Miriam, get up, you're making a scene. I tried to sit up, but the pain was too much. Mom, I really don't feel good. It's probably just nerves, my dad chimed in. Walk it off. Ben stood up, looking serious. She needs medical attention right now. Clara rushed over, her wedding dress rustling. Miriam, what are you doing? This is my wedding day. I'm sorry, I gasped. I didn't mean to. You never mean to, Clara snapped, but somehow, you always manage to steal the spotlight. Can't you let me have one day? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You think I planned this? My mom stepped in. Miriam, that's enough. We're not leaving your sister's wedding. Stop being so dramatic and get back to your seat. Ben's voice cut through the noise. If you won't take her seriously, I'll be fine, Dad said. Take her if you have to, but don't expect us to leave the reception. As Ben helped me up, I looked at my family. They were already turning away, putting on fake smiles for the guests. Clara was back on the dance floor, laughing like nothing had happened. The drive to the hospital was a painful blur, both physically and emotionally. How could they just leave me like that? In the emergency room, doctors hurried to hook me up to machines, while Ben stayed by my side, holding my hand through it all. Finally, a doctor came over with my test results. Miss Thompson, you're having a serious flare-up of your condition. It's a good thing you came in when you did. This could have been very dangerous if left untreated. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, good thing. As the nurses got me settled into a room for overnight observation, I couldn't stop thinking about my family, still at the wedding, dancing and celebrating while I was lying in a hospital bed. Ben squeezed my hand. I'm so sorry, Miriam, you deserve better than that. For the first time that day, I allowed myself to cry. Why don't they care, Ben? Am I really that unimportant to them? He didn't have an answer, and neither did I, but as I lay there, hooked up to IVs and monitors, one thing became clear: I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep putting myself last for people who wouldn't even leave a party to take me to the hospital. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a promise to myself. Things were going to change. I just had to figure out how. A week in the hospital felt like forever. The only good thing was Ben, who visited every day, bringing me books and keeping me company. Not once did my family show up or even call. When I finally got discharged, I went home, completely drained, both physically and emotionally. When I opened the door, Mom, Dad, and Clara were sitting in the living room, acting like it was just another day. Oh, you're back, Mom said, barely looking up from her magazine. There's laundry that needs doing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious right now? I just got out of the hospital. Dad cleared his throat. About that, Miriam, we think you owe your sister an apology for ruining her wedding. Clara nodded, her face full of fake hurt. Do you know how embarrassing that was? Everyone was talking about it. Something inside me snapped. Apologize? I nearly died, and you want me to apologize? Don't be so dramatic, Mom sighed. It's always something with you, isn't it? That was it, the final straw. I'm done, I said, my voice shaking. I'm done with all this toxicity. I'm out of here. I stormed to my room, threw some clothes into a bag, and walked out. They didn't even try to stop me. Ben was waiting outside in his car. One look at my face, and he knew. You're staying with me, he said. It wasn't a question. The next few weeks passed in a blur of doctor's appointments and work. I threw myself into my job, determined to prove that I could succeed without my family's so-called support. One day, I was going through some old papers when I found documents about a trust fund in my name. Curious, I called the bank. I'm sorry, Miss Thompson, but that account has been almost drained, the banker said. My head was spinning. That's impossible. I've never touched it. After some digging, I discovered the ugly truth. My parents had been taking money from my trust fund for years, using it to pay for Clara's expensive lifestyle. I felt sick. Not only had they neglected me emotionally, but they had also been stealing from me. I knew I needed help, so I called a lawyer named Tom. After reviewing the documents, Tom looked serious. This is a big deal, Miriam. Your parents could face criminal charges for this. Part of me wanted to let it go, to just walk away, but a stronger part of me was done being pushed around. What do we do? I asked. Tom leaned forward. We investigate, we gather evidence, and then we make them face the consequences of what they've done. As I nodded, I felt a mix of sadness and determination. This wasn't how I imagined my life would turn out, but I knew it had to be done. For once, I was standing up for myself. That night, as Ben and I sat on his couch, I couldn't help but reflect on everything. You okay? Ben asked, wrapping his arm around me. I don't know, I admitted. I'm angry and hurt, but I also feel free. Is that strange? He shook his head. Not at all. You're finally putting yourself first, And that's a good thing. I leaned into him, realizing he was right. For the first time in my life, I was prioritizing my own well-being. It felt scary, but right. Whatever happens next, I said, I'm ready. Little did I know, the storm that was about to hit my family would change everything, but this time, I wouldn't be the one suffering. This time, I would be the one in control. As the weeks turned into months, my life changed dramatically. I landed the biggest client of my career, putting me on the fast track for an executive position. The day I signed the contract, I thought about how my family would have brushed this off, but Ben, he threw me a surprise party. I'm so proud of you, he said, handing me a glass of champagne. You deserve this. Then, on a quiet Sunday morning, Ben got down on one knee. Miriam, will you marry me? With tears in my eyes, I said yes. We decided to have a small, intimate wedding, everything my sister's wedding wasn't. Meanwhile, Tom had been investigating my family's finances. One day, he called me into his office, looking grim. Miriam, it's worse than we thought. Your father has been embezzling money from his company to fund Clara's lifestyle. I felt sick to my stomach. What do we do? Tom laid out the options, and after a sleepless night, I made my decision. I anonymously tipped off my dad's company about the embezzlement. The fallout was quick and harsh. Dad was fired and faced criminal charges. Our family name, once respected, was now ruined in our community. Then I got a call from Mom. Miriam, please, we need your help. Your father, the company is pressing charges. I took a deep breath. I'm sorry, Mom, I can't help you. But we're family, she cried. Family doesn't treat each other the way you treated me, I replied, and hung up. Next was Clara. Her perfect life had fallen apart. Rick had left her, and without Dad's stolen money, she couldn't keep up her fancy lifestyle. Miriam, I'm so sorry, she sobbed over the phone. I didn't know about the money. Please, can we start over? Part of me wanted to forgive her, to be the bigger person, but then I remembered all the years of neglect, of always being second. I'm sorry, Clara, I can't do this anymore. I wish you the best, but I need to focus on my own life now. When I hung up, I felt lighter, like a burden had been lifted. For the first time, I had chosen myself. The day of my wedding finally arrived. It was nothing like Clara's big, over-the-top event, just me, Ben, and our closest friends in a beautiful garden. As I walked down the aisle, all I saw in Ben's eyes was love, no judgment, no comparison, just pure acceptance. I do, I said, my voice strong and sure. At the reception, I looked around at the small gathering. These were people who truly cared about me, who had stood by me through everything. My colleague Sarah raised a toast. To Miriam and Ben, two of the kindest, strongest people I know. May your life together be filled with love and respect. As Ben and I swayed during our first dance, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. What are you thinking about? Ben asked softly. I'm thinking about how far I've come, I replied, and how excited I am for our future. He smiled and pulled me closer. Me too. I love you, Miriam. I love you too, I said, and I meant it, not just the words, but the promise of a life where I was valued, respected, and loved unconditionally. As the night came to an end, I felt a deep sense of peace. My family's actions had consequences, but I no longer felt responsible for fixing their mistakes. I had my own life to live, my own family to build, with Ben by my side. Looking at my new husband, I smiled. The road ahead might not be perfect, but I knew one thing for sure, I would face it on my own terms, surrounded by people who truly loved me, and that, I realized, was the sweetest justice of all.
Night had long descended upon the small town, and its inhabitants were sleeping soundly, undisturbed by the occasional noise of passing trains on the nearby railroad, the barking of stray dogs, or the bright full moon shining down on them. No one heard the scraping and thudding sounds coming from the outskirts of town, from the cemetery, where two men were digging up a fresh grave. Only the moon watched them with some curiosity. Or was it really the woman sitting on a nearby bench, observing the men's work attentively? "Hey, lady, you haven't changed your mind yet. Maybe we shouldn't disturb the dead?" One of the grave diggers wiped his forehead, asking her. "No, I haven't," the woman answered sharply. "Keep digging. I paid you for this." "I don't understand," the other man said. We'll dig up the coffin, and then what? You're not taking it with you." "I don't need to," the woman replied more calmly. "I just want to see him, and then you'll bury him again." "You're a strange lady," the second man chuckled. "What do you want to see there? According to the tombstone, he's been dead for a month already." "At least not a whole year," the woman said, "but I'll recognize him anyway." The gravediggers exchanged a glance, thinking the woman must be out of her mind with grief. But what did they care? She had paid them handsomely. So they resumed digging in silence, not asking any further questions. Meanwhile, the woman sat there waiting, lost in thought. Marion had given birth to a son after turning 40, after years of trying in vain to conceive with her husband. Then he left her for a younger, healthier woman, who quickly gave him 2 daughters. Marion continued to live alone in their small village. One day, a young agronomist arrived in town, fresh out of college. Marion worked in the accounting office and often interacted with the newcomers, who would come to see the chairman on various matters. She noticed how he looked at her more and more often, and one day he offered her a ride home in his SUV. She accepted and invited him in for tea. And that was the night. Marion herself didn't understand how she lost her mind. In the morning she realized what she had done. Roger was only 24, while she was 40. It was really shameful. She looked good for her age, but it was still wrong, and the people in the village would find out and laugh at her. She told Roger about her concerns, but he just shrugged and said they didn't have to date if she didn't want to. His interest in her seemed to diminish after he got what he wanted. Marion suffered for a week from her foolishness, suffocating the budding love in her heart, and then pretended that Roger meant nothing to her. Roger acted as if nothing had happened between them. He didn't say much, and then Marion found out she was pregnant. She was overjoyed, scared, and ashamed all at once. She had been married to her husband for 15 years, and all the doctors had told her that she was infertile. "I don't recommend keeping the pregnancy," the doctor at the clinic told her bluntly. "You're already at a critical age. It's unknown how it will affect the child." "I will keep it," Marion answered defiantly. "You've been telling me for years that I have no chance of getting pregnant, and now I am pregnant. I don't believe you. Everything will be fine." "Well then, let's keep it," the doctor replied emotionlessly, and he gave Marion a bunch of referrals for tests and prescriptions. Soon Roger left the village. Marion was even happy about it. She didn't want him to know anything. This was her child. In the village, people speculated about who Marion got pregnant from in her old age, but they never figured it out. She lived alone after her husband left, but that was none of their business. The women in the village gossiped for a while and calmed down. It wasn't their burden to raise the child. Porter was born on time and perfectly healthy. When Marion first held her son to her breast, she immediately realized that she was now the happiest person in the world. She was not alone in this world. Porter grew up to be a wonderful son, did well in school, participated in various school competitions, and became more and more interested in track and field. Marion thought that after school her son would go to college, whether for physics, literature, or sports. He was successful in everything, and Marion would agree with any choice he made. But then he shocked his mother. "And then I'm going to a technical university." "Son, why waste time?" Marion sincerely didn't understand. "Enroll now. You'll have a deferment." "No, Mum. I'll serve right away, and then I'll go to university. Besides, I'll have benefits after the army when I enroll." Marion reluctantly agreed. She knew it was useless to argue with her stubborn son. The farewell was well done. All his classmates were there, and Heather was there. She was his first love, a good girl. Marion liked her. She even imagined the girl as her future daughter-in-law. Later they both stood on the platform, embracing and crying, watching the departing train. "Okay, Heather, let's go," Marion sighed. "Now we'll wait for our porter." The girl just nodded in response. She was really nice. Even when she went to the city to study, she didn't forget about Marion and often called her. One day, Marion heard Heather's anxious voice on the phone. "Marion, have you watched the news today?" the girl asked anxiously. "Oh, no, Heather, I decided to re-wallpaper the kitchen today, so I've been busy since morning. I've regretted starting this job 10 times already. I haven't even had a cup of tea all day, and I haven't even turned on the TV in the living room." "Marion, there was an attack," the girl said in a trembling voice. "At the border, where Porter is serving. There was shooting there." Marion's eyes darkened. She struggled to breathe, and her head spun. The woman felt horrible. She turned off the phone and collapsed into a chair in the hallway, exhausted. After regaining her composure, she turned on the TV. The news she heard even somewhat calmed the woman. Yes, there was shooting, but the conscripts weren't involved. And that was already good. An hour later, Porter called. They were allowed to call sometimes. "Son, how are you there?" "Everything's fine, Mum," she heard Porter's cheerful voice, and that completely restored her emotional balance. "There are such passions in the news there." "Well, don't believe everything they show. It's just that some neighbours got worked up, but ours have already calmed them down." "Did you calm them down too?" "What are you talking about? They won't let us anywhere near there. There are contractors working there, and we just go out for training." "Training. Son, take care of yourself." "Of course, Mum." They talked a little about everything. Afterward, Marion felt uneasy again. What kind of training is it when they shoot at the border? Is her son just calming her down, or is there really nothing to worry about? A week passed. Porter didn't call once during that time, and the news from that area became more and more alarming. "Marion, how's Porter?" the woman at the store asked when Marion was passing by for bread. "He's serving," she answered shortly. "Oh, what a disaster! Porter went to serve when such a mess started," the kind-hearted woman lamented. "But, stay strong. Everything's fine." Marion waved her off, but her thoughts were only on her son. A month passed. Porter never called. Marion went to the district draft board. "Everything's normal," the military man from the draft board assured her. "If anything happened, they would have notified us. Don't worry yourself." "But why is he silent, and his phone is unreachable?" Marion asked, barely holding back tears. "Well, that's just how it is now. They're not allowed to call, and nothing will happen to your son. Only the contractors are involved in the conflict, and your Porter is a conscript. He's been serving for 8 months now, right? Soon, Mum, your son will be back home." Marion calmed down a bit. "He'll come back. It's just how things are now." And then, after a month, she suddenly received a call from the draft board, asking her to come urgently. She rushed to the building of the draft board right away. There was no time to wait for the regular bus. She arrived during the lunch break. All the offices were closed, and only a girl in her 20s was sitting in the reception area. "Wait," she said. "The management will be back from lunch soon, and they'll tell you everything." "What happened there?" Marion asked anxiously. "I don't know," the girl said, just lowering her eyes. At 2:00, the commissioner pulled up to the draft board meeting, warily looking at the mother, trembling with nervousness. Marion had just gone outside to inhale some fresh air and calm her thoughts. "Come in," the commissioner said hoarsely, and opened the doors. And in the office, Marion heard the terrible news. "Mrs. Sullivan, your son died," the commissioner said. "Today they called from the unit and said that, as a result of a heart attack, nothing could be done." "What heart attack?" Marion whispered in horror. "My boy is completely healthy. They wouldn't have taken him into the army if he weren't." "Yes, that's true, But the human body is a complex thing. Apparently there was a malfunction somewhere." "A malfunction? What malfunction?" Marion shouted. "I gave birth to a healthy boy, a living one, and you're talking to me about some kind of malfunction?" "Mrs. Sullivan, please don't shout. I don't know any more than you," sighed the Commissioner, "and please accept my condolences." Marion wept as the military office staff brought her water and sedatives. But could that really help? Was Porter, her only son, really dead? No, this had to be a mistake. "Where can I get his body?" Marion asked, calming down a bit. "The thing is, Porter has already been buried. There at the town cemetery where he served," the Commissioner answered, avoiding eye contact. Honestly, he couldn't understand why everything had happened this way, but he was told to deal with it. There's always someone higher up. "Is that right?" Marion couldn't believe it. "They're supposed to return my son to me." "In special circumstances, this can't happen. You know that it's not peaceful in those areas right now. Apparently there are many difficulties with sending the body, so they buried him there," the Commissioner explained. "The documents will be delivered in a few days. They will bring them to you." Marion left the office trembling. She wouldn't hear anything new here, and her son was gone. They didn't even let her say goodbye to his body. The documents. What did she need them for? The whole village seemed to freeze upon hearing of the tragedy. Porter, their lively, kind and cheerful boy, was dead. How terrifying it was. It's so hard for a mother to go through this. They pitied Marion. What a terrible thing had happened to this woman, who had lived her whole life for her son. What was left for her to do now? What was there to live for? The villagers did their best to console Marion with words of sympathy, but it only exacerbated her unhappy heart. Heather arrived upon hearing of the tragedy. "What are you doing here, Heather? You need to study. Your session is probably coming soon," Marion said. "I wouldn't leave you at such a time," Heather cried, tears streaming down her face, and it was easier for Marion with Heather there. Together they remembered Porter, looking at his photos. It was painful, but at the same time, it seemed to bring some comfort. One day, while Heather was with Marion, there was a knock on the door. It was a courier who brought the documents for Porter. Marion just looked at the papers and put them on the table in the living room. She didn't have the strength to read them. Marion went to the bedroom to lie down. She wasn't feeling well. Heather took the documents. "Marion!" Heather suddenly exclaimed in excitement. "What did they tell you Porter died from?" "From a heart attack," Marion replied quietly. "I wish my heart would stop instead." "But it says in the papers that he died of pneumonia." Heather approached the bed and looked at the woman in confusion. Marion abruptly got up from the bed, took the papers and read them carefully. "Maybe something got mixed up at the military office," she muttered. "It's not clear," Heather agreed. There was a pause, and she added, "Marion, have you thought about going there, to where they buried Porter, to find out what happened?" "I have," Marion admitted, "but they told me it's not advisable right now, only when everything calms down. I want to bring my son home. Do you know if exhumation is very complicated?" "I think so," Heather nodded, then exclaimed, "But what difference does it make, whether it's complicated or not? We have to go. Find out why Porter died. And we have to do it soon. Let them exhume his body and explain why they said one thing but wrote another in the papers." Soon, Marion and Heather went to the place where Porter was buried. When they arrived at the military unit, they were told, "No exhumation will be carried out. Your son died of an infection. Opening the grave is dangerous and even illegal." Marion objected. "But the military enlistment office told me that my son died of a heart attack." The unit commander replied, "I don't know what they told you, but the cause of death is clearly written in black and white in the documents. He had a heart attack, because against the background of pneumonia, the heart couldn't handle it. Woman, calm down and accept everything as it is. Nothing can be changed now." Marion tearfully asked, "Can you at least show me my son's grave?" The commander agreed, saying, "Yes, it's in the town cemetery. They'll escort you there." Soon, Marion and Heather were at the cemetery. It was the most remote part of it, and Porter found his final resting place here. Heather and Marion stood at the grave and silently looked at the metal plaque on the wooden cross. Porter Sullivan, only 19 years old, lived on this earth. Suddenly, Heather felt uneasy. She asked Marion for Porter's death documents and double-checked everything. "I don't understand," she said in confusion. "Porter was born on the 25th, but on the plaque it says the 26th, and in the documents too." "They messed up again," Marion replied warily, sat down on the grave and cried. "My little son, how could this happen? They didn't even let me say goodbye to you." Heather convinced her that they had to act. They had to demand exhumation in any case, and after the cemetery, they returned to the unit. The unit commander yelled, "What are you fussing about? They just made a little mistake. You see what time it is now. Everything was done rushing. Your soldier is buried there, and that's it. What do you want to see there? A decomposing body? Are you sure you can handle that sight?" Marion replied quietly, "I can handle it." But they didn't listen to her anymore, escorted her out of the unit, and told her to calm down and accept the loss. No one will open Porter's grave. It's not allowed. In the hotel, Heather and Marion silently packed their things. The train was coming soon, and then Marion dropped her suitcase and burst into tears. "I'm not going anywhere," she suddenly said firmly. "I'll dig up this grave myself, and only when I realise that my child is there, then I'll go." "How can you do it yourself?" Heather was shocked. "Who will let you?" "I've already figured it all out. I'll find 2 homeless people and pay them a high reward to open the grave at night, open the coffin and see if Porter is there. It hasn't been that long." "How much do you have to pay homeless people to agree to that?" Heather was at a loss. "I have savings. I saved it for my son's education, but this is how it turned out. I'll give it all to them," Marion said firmly. "And what about the infection?" Heather asked. "Heather, this disease probably has been among us for a long time. It won't be any worse in the coffin." "Maybe you're right. But there's a guard at the cemetery. He'll notice when they start digging up the grave." Heather looked worried. "This is where you'll help me. We'll buy him some drinks. You'll treat him well, distract him." "You've thought of everything," Heather said with a sad smile. "So we just need to find the diggers." They were lucky, and soon they found 2 strong-looking men who appeared to be homeless at the station, and explained what they needed. The homeless men didn't think long. They agreed. They weren't bothered that they would be breaking the law. After all, they were promised good money. They realized that if something went wrong, they could run away and no one would catch them. And so, under the cover of darkness, they arrived at the cemetery. Heather was busy distracting the guard at the cemetery. He was happy that a young girl had come to chat with him, as he was used to only seeing graves and sad people. And in the meantime, Marion was sitting nearby her son's grave, anxiously waiting. The homeless men were waving their shovels. "Bingo!" one of them shouted, hitting the lid of the coffin. They both dug in, and soon they pulled the coffin out of the grave. "It's so light," said the digger. "Was your son tiny when he went to serve?" Marion struggled to speak. "He was 90 kilograms when he left to serve," she finally managed to say, unable to take her eyes off the coffin. "Open it, please." The men hooked the lid, and with a loud noise the coffin opened. All 3 of them looked inside and gasped. The moon was shining desperately, so everything was perfectly visible. The coffin was empty. "Where's the deceased?" one of the homeless men finally said. "He ran away." The second one smirked and looked at Marion, saying, "Well, Mother, should we bury it?" "No way!" Marion screamed as if waking up. "Leave everything as it is. You go. Go away from here. Thank you." After paying the diggers, Marion made some calls, first to Heather, then to the police. When the police arrived at the cemetery, she explained what she was doing there, incoherently. Of course, the police officers couldn't believe that 2 women had dug up the grave and pulled out the coffin themselves, but they turned a blind eye to that. Everyone was interested in something else. Where was the body? The next morning, the city prosecutor's office was on fire, and representatives of the military prosecutor's office arrived. At first, they wanted to blame Marion for everything. Why did she dig up the grave? But the main question remained unanswered. Where was the body? The commander of the unit where Porter served was questioned, and that's when everything was revealed. It turned out that Porter was among the other conscripts on manoeuvres. Then there was shelling, real shelling. The conscripts were frightened and they ran off in different directions. It was their first real battle. The arrived patrol found everyone later, but Porter wasn't there. Apparently he was killed. And they didn't find his body because the entire field was riddled with craters from explosions. It was decided that Porter's body was somewhere on the ground. What to do? They decided to issue a death certificate for Porter due to illness to justify everything to the authorities. After that, they can't bring the boy back anyway. Who knew that his mother would be so stubborn? It had been about 6 months since Marion and Heather returned to their hometown. There were major personnel changes in that military unit, including the unit commander, who was brought to martial court. However, it did not make things easier for Marion because her son didn't even have a grave. The woman turned grey with grief, while Heather cried all the time. She hoped until the end that Porter was alive and that they had confused him with another soldier. But now they know that he is definitely no longer in this world. One early morning, someone knocked on Marion's window. The poor woman opened the door and froze. Was she dreaming? She even rubbed her eyes. Porter stood in the doorway, alive, although thin. "Mum, I'm back," her son exclaimed. "Porter, am I sleeping?" whispered the woman. "Mum, I'm not a dream, I'm alive." Porter laughed and rushed to his mother, who fell unconscious. When Marion came to her senses, she was already covered with a blanket on the bed, and her son sat next to her. "Alive." "Son, they told me you had died," Marion whispered. "They were wrong, Mum." Porter sighed and told her. It turned out that during the exercises and shelling, he was concussed and taken captive. Porter and the other captive guys were kept in some basement for all these months. The military negotiated for their release, but everything fell apart at the last minute. Recently, the transfer finally took place. Everyone was immediately taken to the hospital, where it was found that Porter was considered dead. After receiving the necessary treatment, he was demobilized and sent home. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Marion cried. "I couldn't, Mum. We were forbidden to contact our relatives until all the checks were done. And as soon as it became possible, I rushed to see you. And now I'm home. My son, I won't let you go anywhere else." Although, no, she did. After a while, Porter, as he had dreamed before, entered a technical university and is now studying successfully. He and Heather will soon have a wedding. Marilyn worked at one of the best clinics in the city as a surgeon. It was the woman's dream. Her mother, Helen Avila, did not approve of her daughter's choice to dig into human bodies all her life. Yes, saving lives is a noble and honourable mission, but let someone else do it. And her Marilyn, a fragile and calm girl, could be a neurologist, an ophthalmologist, a general practitioner at worst. But Marilyn said firmly, no, only a surgeon. It should be said that during her work in the clinic, she showed herself only in the best light, and she was already entrusted with quite complex operations. She was often called in on weekdays and holidays. "Oh, daughter, you'll never get married like this," sighed Mrs. Avila. "Oh, Mummy, as if getting married is the main purpose in life." "Yes, you are a woman, and I don't need to explain to you that our female age is not long. The clock is ticking after all," the mother kept arguing. "Let them tick." Marilyn waved her hand. The last time she had a relationship, it was in college with a classmate. Then he cheated on her with her best friend. Since then, Marilyn had gotten rid of her friends and kept her distance from men, so as not to experience all that pain again. However, she was a real beauty. Curly blonde hair, white porcelain-like skin, brown eyes, such a doll. Only this doll had a steel character. What to do? The profession left an imprint on her. That evening, Marilyn had already left the clinic. It was a tough shift. 2 planned minor surgeries in the morning, and then several hours of surgery on a guy after a car accident. And now nothing threatened his life. Marilyn was tired. She walked along the path of the hospital park and already imagined how she would finally enter their apartment with her mother after quickly taking off boots, jacket and taking a bath. She would be basking in a snow-white bath with fluffy blackberry foam for an hour, and then she would flop into bed and disappear into the realm of Morpheus. Suddenly she heard a heavy groan. Marilyn stopped and looked around in confusion. It was already late October outside, and it was getting dark early. And this evening it had already frozen quite a bit. Marilyn shivered from the cold and looked closely at the nearest bushes. It seemed to her that the groan was coming from there. "Who's there?" she asked loudly, and boldly stepped towards the withered, huge bush, taking her phone as a flashlight. In the next second, she saw a person lying on the ground. He writhed in pain, gasped for air with his lips, trying to shout something, but only a sound that sounded more like a moan came out of his throat. Marilyn approached closer. In the light of the phone, she saw a miserable man and recoiled. He was a real bum, dressed in some rags of an indefinite age. His hair had grown to a dishevelled mess, his beard was grey, and there was the smell that confirmed once again, in front of her was a person who had fallen to the bottom of society. Maybe he's drunk, she thought doubtfully, but then she realised that she was trying to find a reason not to get closer and felt ashamed of it right away. As a doctor, she understood that the person needed urgent medical help. "Are you okay?" she asked, sitting down next to the bum. He looked at her with eyes full of pain and despair, and again he only groaned, curling up into a ball and holding his stomach. "Let me see what's wrong with you. I'm a doctor," Marilyn said softly, touching the unfortunate man's hand. From the calm voice, from the humane attitude that this tramp had already forgotten, he froze. Marilyn took his hand off his stomach and only made a few manipulations, realizing immediately that it was appendicitis, possibly peritonitis, that had begun. There was no time to lose. "I'll help you now," she said. "Just hold on a little longer." Marilyn dialed the phone of the emergency room of her clinic and called the orderlies. "A patient in the park?" The nurse was surprised. "Then you need an ambulance. We're a private clinic, not governmental, and they don't bring such people to us. The person needs emergency surgery. He may not make it to another hospital. Carrie, quickly send the orderlies to help me bring him to the clinic and prepare the operation room," Marilyn commanded the nurse. Carrie couldn't disobey the surgeon's command, and now the orderlies were running down the park path with a stretcher. Upon seeing the person Marilyn had found, the staff was stunned. "Dr. Avila, are you sure we can take him in?" one of the men doubted. "Are you suggesting we leave him here?" Marilyn objected. But he's a homeless person, and we're an elite clinic. First and foremost, he is a human being, so take him carefully, commanded Marilyn, who knew there was not a minute to lose. The orderlies obediently did what the doctor had told them. In the reception room, everyone was shocked. The duty doctor refused to operate on the man without permission of the head doctor. Marilyn took charge and ordered the orderlies to clean the patient up and take him to the first operating room. "Your shift is over, Dr. Avila. The ambulance will take him now," the duty doctor said. "And where will they take him? To the third clinic? Where do they take everyone like him?" Marilyn frowned. "It takes more than an hour to get there, and he already has peritonitis. He'll die on the way." "So what? We're supposed to collect all the mud? We're an elite clinic. He has all sorts of infections." "Good sterilization of the operating room is all we need. It's not a problem," Marilyn retorted, and she personally rolled the homeless man on a stretcher into the processing room, and the nurses followed hesitantly. They understood that as a human being, Marilyn was right, but they wondered what the chief doctor would say about this. Dr. Cosimano had already left the clinic for the day, but they knew he would find out tomorrow. "Girls, I take full responsibility," Marilyn said, seeing the nurse's doubt. "Quickly, get him ready. I'm going to the operating room." The elderly anesthesiologist said nothing. He was still of the old school, and everyone was equal on the operating table for him. He approved of Marilyn's actions and tried not to think about the chief doctor's reaction, but he had no doubt that there would be a scandal tomorrow. The operation was successful, though not without difficulties. "You made the right decision, Marilyn," the anesthesiologist told her. "The old man would have died if you had sent him to another hospital." "That's what I thought," Marilyn nodded. "But get ready, you'll be having a hard day tomorrow," the anesthesiologist warned. "What? Is our Dr. Cosimano not a human being?" Marilyn shrugged. "He's a businessman first. Who's going to pay for this homeless man? He doesn't even have any documents," the anesthesiologist reminded her. "Oh my God, let him lie for a couple of days. Then we'll transfer him to another clinic." "Oh girl, you're so naive," said an old doctor, shaking his head. But Marilyn was sure that the chief doctor would understand her. She didn't get home until late at night. What kind of bath with blackberry foam could she have here? She barely washed herself up, made it to the bed, and collapsed onto the pillow, sinking into a deep sleep. The next morning, the chief doctor called and yelled at her that she had created unsanitary conditions and violated the rules of the clinic. "What am I supposed to do now? Close the clinic for quarantine?" Dr. Cosimano shouted. "Why quarantine? We've taken all the express tests from him, an x-ray, everything's fine with him," Marilyn replied calmly. "Dr. Cosimano, he would have died if I hadn't performed the emergency operation." "So what? Who is he to you? Your father, brother, husband, or uncle? This homeless old man has long since died for society," the chief doctor raged. "Dr. Cosimano, excuse me, but you're not reasoning like a doctor," Marilyn dared to say. "How dare you talk back to me?" the chief doctor shouted. "You're fired. The courier will deliver your papers and forget about the money. All your earnings will go to cover the clinic's losses." "What losses?" Marilyn bitterly smiled, her hands trembling with indignation. "For the clinic's sterilization," the chief doctor bellowed, then hung up. After the conversation, Marilyn was beside herself. She didn't even feel the tears running down her face. She just stood by the window, and the tears flowed. "Daughter, are you crying?" Mrs. Avila approached Marilyn cautiously. "What was the conversation about?" "The chief doctor called," Marilyn said, wiping away her tears. "Mum, I was fired." And she told the whole story while her mother listened and shook her head. Lord, what times we live in. We now have people and not people. And there are inhumane people as well, Marilyn replied, calming down. Like Dr. Cosimano, for them only status and money matter, and human life is worth nothing. Don't worry, daughter. Her mother comforted Marilyn with a hug. "You did everything right. I'm sure someone up there is watching all of this very carefully. It will be credited to you." "Credited," Marilyn said, smiling sadly. "But now I am unemployed. How will I live? I have to find a new job. Although I'm not certain that Dr. Cosomano won't put me on a blacklist, and no one will hire me after that." "Well, damn them," Mrs. Avila waved her hand. "You can become a pharmaceutical representative. They earn pretty well." "But I'm a surgeon, Mum. I'm used to saving people, not pushing unknown pills on them. Although, maybe you're right. Well, we'll see." Meanwhile, Dr. Cosomano had already called other clinics and warned his colleagues not to hire Marilyn under any circumstances. At that moment, his alarmed secretary knocked on his door. "Dr. Cosomano, we're having an inspection," she whispered frantically. "My friend works at the Ministry of Health. She called to warn us that they're coming unexpectedly." "Damn it!" Dr. Cosomano exclaimed. "Everything is not good. Has that bum already been taken away?" "No, they're waiting for the ambulance." "When will it arrive?" He dialed the phone number of the head of the therapeutic department, shouted at him, and ordered to get rid of the homeless man. "Even if you throw him under a bush, I don't care," the chief doctor shouted. "I have an inspection from the Ministry of Health, and there's a bum lying here. Undocumented, unverified. Take him to the far end of the park. Let the ambulance pick him up from there." The unfortunate patient was being taken out when people from the Ministry of Health appeared in the doorway. They had already passed by, but one man suddenly wondered where they were taking the patient. "Outside? Where is the ambulance?" "It should be here any minute," Dr. Cosomano replied. "The patient had urgent surgery and is now being transferred for treatment." The man from the Ministry of Health turned to the door, looked out the window. The ambulance has already arrived. He has already passed by the patient, but he suddenly looked at his face and froze. "Dad?" the man exclaimed and ran to the stretcher. "Is that you?" The homeless man on the stretcher just lay there, looking at the men with confusion. But more often than not, he fixed his gaze on Brad. Yes, he certainly knew him from a past life before the tragedy happened to him. He just couldn't remember exactly. But the man called him Dad. So, he's his son? "Dad, do you recognize me?" Brad scrutinized the familiar features and couldn't believe that his father, whom they had been searching for almost 2 years, having lost all hope of finding him alive, was lying in front of him on a stretcher like this, emaciated, with a beard and hair that had grown almost to his shoulders. This story happened over a year ago. Mr. Reed had just celebrated his 60th birthday at the time and was planning to gradually retire from his business related to medical equipment. He wanted his son to leave his bureaucratic job at the Ministry of Health and engage in real business. But Brad was being stubborn, saying that he liked his job and that he was not a businessman at all. This all saddened Mr. Reed a lot. Who would he pass on his business to? His wife had a son from her first marriage, and Mr. Reed adopted him many years ago. Chad was older than Brad, but he had no head for business. Chad had ruined everything in no time. However, Mr. Reed didn't have any other options. Therefore, he wrote a power of attorney for Chad and started gradually teaching him the business. And then Mr. Reed was attacked. A black Jeep cut off his SUV on the road, and some muscle-bound guys jumped out and hit him on the head. After that, the old businessman only remembered how he was flying with the car into the river. He managed to get out of the sinking car, and then a memory gap. He woke up on the shore, his head hurt, his limbs were like wood, and most importantly, he didn't remember anything. On the shore, 2 homeless men were warming themselves by a fire nearby. Mr. Reed went to them. When they saw an old man with a bloody head, they offered to help to take him home. But where to go? Mr. Reed didn't remember anything. So Mr. Reed became a tramp, without memory, without a past. Other homeless people called him Tom. Why Tom? They just had to call him something. Meanwhile, Mr. Reed's relatives were reported by the police as having found the car in the river, but nobody was found in it. The current was so strong that they could search for several years and still not find anything. Brad didn't believe that his father was dead and kept looking for him, but being in the same city, they walked on different streets. They never met. And Chad quickly took on the role of the company's leader and began to build the business in his own way. And he messed it up, causing the father's business to go bankrupt. Brad was furious with his brother. He ruined their father's business. How do they tell him about it when he comes back? People don't come back from the dead, Chad smirked. And yet Mr. Reed came back. Yes, that was him lying on the couch. Brad immediately ordered that his father be taken to a ward and provided with the best care. No one argued with him. The chief physician now only gave orders, what and how to do. Brad did not care why his father was going to be transferred to another clinic. He was worried about other thoughts. How to restore his father's memory. It was clear that he had amnesia. But then he accidentally overheard a conversation between two nurses. He was standing in the sanitation room and the girls were chatting in the corridor. "Just imagine," said one of them, "our chief is currently scrambling to please the old man, but he fired Dr. Avila. For what? She saved this homeless man's life. Don't even talk about it. Poor doctor. Such a capable doctor. Her hands are golden," added the second nurse. "Injustice was, is, and will be. So maybe we should tell the man from the Ministry of Health about who saved his father and who suffered because of it. Oh no, we'll end up being the scapegoat." At this moment, Brad appeared from behind the door. "Excuse me, but I heard everything," he said directly. "Let's talk about what really happened there." The nurses blushed and started denying it, but Brad had his own methods of influence. He could also fire anyone, and it worked. The girls told him who found Brad's father, how Marilyn went to surgery without listening to anyone, how the chief yelled on the phone when he laid her off, and how he wanted to push the patient out just after the operation, anywhere, even on the street, just so the inspectors from the Ministry of Health wouldn't find a person without documents in the clinic. After hearing all of this, Brad headed to the chief doctor's office. Dr. Cosomano was in a great mood. The inspection never took place and he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. And the fact that the homeless person turned out to be the inspector's father was even better for him. Dr. Cosomano had already come up with his own version of how they saved the old man in the clinic. Yes, they wanted to transfer him, but everything was according to the rules. "Don't worry," Dr. Cosomano smiled when he saw Brad at the door of his office and said, "Your father will receive the best care." "I have no doubt," answered Brad. Then he sat across from the chief doctor and looked him in the eye, saying, "Now, of course he'll receive the best care, because you know who his son is. But before that, you wanted to throw him out like a dog." "What are you talking about? You're mistaken," stammered Dr. Cosomano, blushing. "And you fired the surgeon, the woman who saved my father." "She left on her own." "You're lying. I know everything." "So, here's what you're going to do now. You're going to personally go to her and bring her here." "Understood," nodded the chief doctor. "I'll be quick." And he literally ran out of the office, leaving Brad alone. When Marilyn saw the chief doctor on the doorstep of her apartment, she was bewildered. Did he personally bring her documents? "Marilyn, forget everything I said to you. I was wrong. Forgive me," he said quickly, nervously fiddling with his button. "Let's go to the clinic. There you will meet the son of this old man on whom you operated." "Marilyn, you're wonderful. It turns out to be the father of the boss from the Ministry of Health." Marilyn was surprised. What was he doing on the street? "Oh, there's a dark story there. The police will deal with it now." Marilyn hesitated, but then she thought, "I love my job. Okay, I'll put my pride aside." So she went to the clinic with the chief doctor. Brad, seeing the young surgeon, was surprised. "She's just a girl." "Well done. She wasn't afraid to go against established rules. She's brave. Thank you for rescuing my father. From now on, work calmly. No one will fire you again, he said. Dr. Cosomano realized his mistake and nodded his head like a bobblehead. Marilyn struggled to hold back her laughter, finding him pathetic. Several months passed and Mr. Reed was released from the hospital. Marilyn continued working at the clinic, and the incident was soon forgotten. Then a rumour spread through the city claiming that Chad, Mr. Reed's adopted son, was guilty of attempting to murder the elderly businessman. He had ordered the hit to accelerate the process of inheriting the business. Chad was currently under investigation, and Mr. Reed's memory was slowly returning. Although he was no longer involved in the business, he had a caring son to support him in his old age. Chad was given a suspended sentence, thanks to Brad, who hired a good lawyer at Mr. Reed's request. After the trial, Chad left the city and cut off communication with his family. The chief doctor at the clinic was amazed when he learned these details. And how does the earth carry such horrible people? The chief doctor marvelled when he learned these details. How can a man do such a thing? His subordinates listened to him and only nodded, then smiled. Who would speak about honour and morality? Later, an inspection at the clinic revealed that the chief doctor had been illegally appropriating state funds for personal gain. He was tried, given a suspended sentence, and banned from practicing medicine. Marilyn kept working as a surgeon, but now, after a day at work, she is rushing not home to her mother, but on a date. She started dating Brad, and they are getting married soon. Although he is older than Marilyn, the age difference is not noticeable, because love knows no boundaries. Laurel, hello! A woman's excited voice shouted into the phone. Don't you recognize me? I don't understand. Laurel frantically tried to remember the voice, which was familiar, but... Oh, it's me, Rachel Arnett. The woman who had called spoke even louder into the receiver. Laurel, you are really something. I'm your classmate, a school friend. Have you already forgotten me? Oh, Rachel! Laurel rejoiced sincerely, saying, I just didn't expect your call. Sorry, dear. Your mum gave me your phone number. The former school friends chatted casually. The last time they saw each other was at graduation. After, Laurel left her village to conquer the capital, and Rachel entered the regional college. 15 years had passed since high school, and they never met. Laurel came home and Rachel was away, or vice versa. Then they became even more distant. They each had their own lives. Rachel had been married for a long time, worked in one of the gymnasiums in the region. They had 2 children already. As for Laurel, she was still alone, just like before. From time to time she had relationships, but they didn't seem to work out for some reason, and she was already over 30. Laurel, our classmates want to have a homecoming, Rachel suddenly said, as if, by the way, will you come? Laurel got excited and said, yes, of course. The friends talked over the details and agreed to call the next day. Laurel happily hung up the phone. It would be interesting to see her classmates. But then she felt a pang of insecurity. Rachel said that Code became a businessman. Kelly was working in the regional administration and others were doing well. And she was almost a loser. Sure, she studied in the capital and works there, but what's the use? She has no place of her own and no family. And she's always getting reprimands at work. Of course, among her classmates, she's not the least successful person. There are worse people who even drank themselves to death. But all of Laurel's friends are quite successful, and they've all had families and children long ago. And suddenly Laurel felt so sad. Why does she need this reunion? She'll refuse. It seems to me that you're worrying about nothing, objected her colleague Monica, who was also Laurel's best friend. Husbands, children, That's not the most important in life, and by the way, they don't need to know everything about you. You live in the capital. You work for a cool company. Trust me, they'll be jealous of you." Laurel only sighed. I wish. Besides, she wasn't in an excellent mood. Her mother had given up lately. She was in and out of hospitals. She wasn't an old woman, but she had a disease. Her heart was bad, and she had diabetes. Laurel was always on the phone with her mother, sent her money for medicine, and often stayed with her on weekends. Nevertheless, Monica convinced Laurel not to give up the reunion. So, at the appointed time, Laurel was going to the station to go home. She was even in a good mood. She would soon see her mother, that was the main thing. And it had to happen that on the way to the station the cab broke down. In order not to miss the train, the girl decided to hitchhike. Literally in a minute, a luxury black car stopped nearby and the driver looked out. "Young lady, where are you going?" The blonde-haired man smiled welcoming. When he heard that she was going to the train station, he opened the door. "Jump in, I'm heading that way too." "I'll just take my bag." Laurel was happy and ran to the car. On the way, they got to talking. Dominic was on his way to the station to meet a work companion. "Without a ring," Laurel remarked to herself, "and handsome." The man also looked at her with interest, and when they arrived at the station, he asked for her phone number. Laurel didn't hesitate. They were both adults, so she immediately wrote it down on a piece of paper and gave it to Dominic. "I'll be sure to call you," he said, while looking at the girl so affectionately that she was even embarrassed. "Just not this weekend." Laurel came to her senses. "I'll be far out of the city." "I understand." Dominic pointed at the bag and with a look and asked, "May I help you carry it to the station?" No, Laurel was completely embarrassed. "It's not heavy." But nevertheless, Dominic carried her bag, and she was very grateful to him. Sitting on the train, she kept remembering her new acquaintance and smiling. He was a very interesting man. The homecoming was surprisingly fun, interesting and warm. No one bragged about their achievements. For one evening, everyone became equal. A businessman, a politician, a salesman, and a mechanizer. Laurel was glad that she had listened to Monica. No one dwelt on her marital status, but on the contrary, they praised her. "You are tenacious, Laurel. You managed to become a capital dweller. Well done." And only her mother once again was a little upset, looking even more aged and painful. "You, my daughter, don't worry so much about me." Her mother understood Laurel's thoughts. "I'll live as long as I'm supposed to, so why are you upset? You need to organize your life. Why did you send me money last month? You should have saved up for a mortgage. How long are you going to stay in rented apartments?" "Mum, don't start," Laurel cut her off. "I've been helping you, and I'll continue to do so. Where will you get money for medicine?" "I have a pension." Mum tried to smile and say, "I'll manage." "Exactly," grinned Laurel, "and you'll only eat bread and water for a whole month." "Oh, my daughter, my good girl." Her mother hugged her. "You should get married. I want to see my grandchildren." Laurel smiled forcefully and then moved the conversation to the meeting with her classmates and her work. For as long as the girl could remember, she and her mother had always lived alone. Her father left the family before Laurel turned 3, and since then he has been wandering somewhere in the world. He did not pay alimony, and all her life her mother had been supporting Laurel alone. She worked at the post office, as a saleswoman, at cleaning. That's why, when her daughter finished school, her mother insisted that she should make her way to the capital to study. So Laurel did. Her mother saved up some money for her daughter's studies and gave it to her for living expenses. Laurel understood this, so when she started working, she always sent part of her salary to her mother. At first her mother argued, but Laurel persisted, and now, when her mother's health was completely shaken and she had to retire on disability, it was by the way. But the poor woman was still worried that her daughter was depriving herself for her sake. However, Laurel could not do otherwise. She was very attached to her mother. On Monday morning, Laurel was already at work. Monica was eagerly awaiting the details of the homecoming. "You see, I told you so," said her friend, satisfied. "I'm delighted that I listened to you," Laurel confessed. The friends laughed and hugged each other. She and Monica had been good friends from the very beginning, as Laurel got a job in this company, and for the last 2 years they had become best friends. Monica was also from neighbouring city, but her parents helped her buy an apartment, so she felt more confident in the capital. But her personal life was about the same as Laurel's. She had not serious relationships, but only fleeting romances. But Monica, unlike Laurel, did not dwell on it. She generally believed that until the age of 40, one should live for oneself. "Monica, what about children?" Laurel always argued. "Don't you want a little one?" "A child?" Monica snorted. "It's only a pretty picture, but in reality, just think, Laurel, how much money and effort are needed for them. If a millionaire comes along with me, then it's a different matter." "A millionaire?" Laurel snorted with a smile. "There are a lot of us who need them. Get in line." And in the evening, after coming home from work, Laurel got a call from Dominic. To be honest, she didn't realise who it was at first. There was so much communication during the weekend that she simply forgot about a random acquaintance on the road. They agreed to meet. The next day after work, there was Dominic's car outside the office, and Dominic was standing next to it. "It's for me," Laurel said something mysterious to Monica and went towards Dominic. Monica was a little taken aback and watched in amazement as a handsome young man opened the door of an expensive car in front of Laurel as she smiled back at him. "What a sly girl," marvelled Monica at the time. "She's got such a boyfriend and not a word to say about it. I'll find out everything tomorrow." It was a wonderful evening. Laurel and Dominic sat comfortably in a small, cosy cafe, enjoying each other's company. Dominic revealed that he worked at his father's large enterprise and was unmarried. "It's hard to believe that by the age of 30, no one has caught such a promising man," joked Laurel. "There are so many beautiful girls around, especially at your work, I'm sure." "I agree there are many girls around," nodded Dominic, "but it always seemed to me that I had not yet met the only one." And he looked at Laurel so expressively that she was even embarrassed. Dominic then took her hand in his and gently ran his thumb over her fingers. He smiled and shook his head. "And let's go on the merry-go-round?" He dumbfounded the girl with his suggestion. "On a merry-go-round?" she repeated. "But it's getting late." "Well, the parks are still open. Let's go." Dominic looked at Laurel expectantly. Honestly, Laurel couldn't stand all these amusement parks, but she wanted to be with Dominic so much that she didn't want to disappoint him. In the amusement park, Laurel and Dominic immediately headed for the Ferris wheel. Laurel, however, had been afraid of heights since childhood and followed Dominic on cotton legs. "Are you afraid?" Dominic asked, surprised as they started to climb. "I, on the contrary, love heights." Laurel only nodded her head. From fear she couldn't even speak, and she had already regretted 1,000 times that she agreed. "What a fool I am," the girl thought. "Well, maybe I like him, but what if he's some kind of maniac?" "Laurel, I'm normal," Dominic said, seeming to guess her thoughts. "I just have a long-held dream, to ride with a beautiful girl on the Ferris wheel, and just such a girl appeared in my field of vision." Saying this, Dominic pulled a small box out of his pocket, opened it, and a dainty bracelet glittered in his hands. "I want to give it to you for good luck," he said with a smile, "and as my little rehabilitation in your eyes, because I showed up on our first date without flowers, and then drove you here." Laurel was surprised that the guy gave her a gold bracelet on their first date. It doesn't happen in life like that. But the pretty bracelet really shone on Laurel's wrist, and down below The neon lights of the city shone. Afterward, they walked around the city at night. Laurel was a little shocked by everything that was happening. She had never experienced so many events in just a couple of hours. In general, she had never had such an emotional shake before. Yes, Dominic surprised her. Later at home, lying in bed, Laurel thought back to their walk. She remembered the Ferris wheel with a smile, admired the bracelet, and then suddenly realized that her life would not be the same from that moment on. In the morning, she woke up to a text message from Dominic. "Good morning. Have a lovely day. I'll be waiting for you after work tonight." Laurel smiled. Maybe he would take her to the merry-go-round again. With Dominic, she wasn't afraid. He seemed so reliable to her. "I don't understand," Monica wondered when Laurel appeared at her workplace. "How could you hide such a handsome man from me? Are we really friends?" "Oh, Monica, don't be mad at me. I just met him recently," Laurel explained. "And he took you to the merry-go-round on the first date like that?" Monica asked in surprise. "He's some kind of strange man." "I thought so too at first," Laurel admitted. "But after that, I started thinking differently. I felt so at ease and free next to him." "You are a bad psychologist," Monica said, shaking her head. "Next, he'll take you parachuting. Will you agree then as well?" "Perhaps," Laurel nodded. "I'm not the least bit afraid of him, Monica. I'm afraid to jinx it, but I think I've found my man. He's so wonderful." "In this case, I like your new bracelet most of all. It's obviously not cheap," said Monica. "Apparently your Dominic is really a worthwhile option." That evening, Dominic waited for Laurel near the office again. Later they went to a restaurant. Laurel was subconsciously waiting for Dominic to surprise her this time, but everything seemed to go quietly. It was only when Laurel closed the doors behind her after returning home that she heard a strange sound in the kitchen near the window. She opened the curtain and saw a bunch of brightly coloured balloons hanging outside her window with the inscription, "Laurel, you are so cool," on one of them. The girl sighed happily. It was a crazy and exciting time in her life. She watched the balloons fly upward and thought about how amazing Dominic was and what would happen next. And then there was love. For the first time in her life, Laurel laughed so much and breathed so fully. Yes, Dominic was inimitable. Sometimes the girl wondered to herself, what does it mean? Chance? What if the cab hadn't broken down when she was rushing to the reunion? Life was amazing. They met every day, but on weekends, Laurel still went to her mother's. She didn't dare offer Dominic a ride, and he kept silent. He drove her to the station, and that was it. Laurel decided that it wasn't the right time yet. 3 months had passed since the day they first met. One evening, Dominic introduced Laurel to his parents, and the girl realized the significant changes were coming to her life. The girl liked Dominic's parents. His father was serious and looked like a businessman, while his mother was soulful. They didn't care that Laurel wasn't from the capital. Her relationship with their son was more important to them. It was obvious to everyone that Laurel was in love with Dominic and listened to him attentively. Soon after meeting with his parents, Dominic proposed to Laurel, and they began to prepare for their wedding. They arranged everything, from guests to outfits. However, Laurel was concerned that Dominic hadn't met her mother yet. "Honey, she's very sick," Dominic explained. "We'll go see her after the wedding. Maybe we'll bring her to the capital and show her good doctors. I'm busy at work and the wedding is coming up." Laurel agreed. She called her mother to tell her the good news. "Daughter, I'm so happy for you," her mother said. "Of course I won't be able to come to the wedding. I can hardly get out of the house. But you'll come and visit me afterwards, won't you?" "Of course, Mummy," Laurel promised. "Thank you. You're not upset, are you?" "Why would I be upset, my dear?" her mother exclaimed. "I'm just happy that you've settled your life." That's the most important thing to me." Something about the situation made Laurel uneasy, but she couldn't figure out what it was. She decided that after the wedding she would persuade Dominic to meet her mother. After all, her mother had raised her and given her everything, and now she had found a rich husband and seemed to have forgotten where she came from. On the day of the wedding, Laurel was nervous. Her friend Monica teased her, saying she looked like a little girl. "I'm distressed," Laurel almost cried. "So many guests. There will even be journalists there." "So what?" Monica looked at her strangely. "Rejoice. You're now the wife of a rich heir." Laurel shook her head. She didn't care about being a rich man's wife. Half an hour before the wedding, Laurel was in the bride's room adjusting her veil when the phone rang. It was her mother's neighbour. "Laurel," the girl heard Mrs. Bezos' crying voice. "Your mum is not doing well at all. The ambulance came at night. They didn't take her, they only gave her shots. In the morning one more came. I don't know what will happen next." "So she's still at home, right?" Laurel's heart sank at the news. "Yeah, and remember, the ambulance wouldn't take her. They said they couldn't get her there. They need a special vehicle. So our mother is lying at home waiting to die," the neighbour wailed. "I'm coming," cried Laurel. She ran out of the room and rushed to Dominic. "Where are you going?" the groom asked indignantly. "We have a wedding in 20 minutes. All the guests have already arrived, even journalists. My grandfather has come all the way from France, and he hasn't met you yet. Do you understand what you're asking me to do? Laurel, don't get so worked up. Today we'll celebrate the wedding and tomorrow we'll go to your mother's." "So you're telling me that while my mum is dying, we're going to have fun?" Laurel recoiled from Dominic's words. In the next second, she broke from her seat and rushed down the stairs, still wearing her wedding dress. She threw on a light coat and her veil came off somewhere along the way. The guests didn't realise where the bride had gone, but Dominic stood white as chalk. Monica came up to him holding Laurel's veil. They both looked at each other, confusedly. But Laurel didn't see them. She was rushing to her mother. She caught a ride with a driver who agreed to take her straight to the house. Luckily, she had her wallet with her. Laurel found her mother at home just as a special vehicle was arriving. Mrs. Besso had arranged for it to be sent. "Mummy!" The girl rushed to the stretcher. "How are you, my dear?" "I'm good," the mother said weakly. "Why did my dear neighbour stir you up like that? Go! You have a wedding today. I'll be all right." "A runaway bride?" he joked, looking at the dress peeking out from under the coat. "I've never seen anything like that before." "Probably not a bride anymore," Laurel replied tiredly. "Well, it's all right," cried the paramedic. "If that's so, it's not meant to be." Laurel only looked sadly at him. It was easy for him to say. And Dominic, who had become her life, was that really the end of their love? But she couldn't have fun, knowing her mum was dying. "Don't worry," the paramedic said, as if reading her thoughts. "We'll treat your mum. Now we'll take her to the vascular centre in the capital. Believe me, everything will be fine. By the way, you can come with us." Laurel agreed, and all the way she held her mother's hand. The paramedic Will was very attentive. He spoke the whole trip, correcting Laurel's mother's drip and measuring her blood pressure. He did not even forget to calm Laurel down. At the clinic in the capital, Laurel's mother was admitted without any problems. The doctors only wondered why she had not been referred to them for treatment before. "Don't worry, Laurel, everything will be fine with your mum." Will said goodbye. "Where are you going now?" "I'll try to resuscitate my personal life," Laurel replied sadly. She dialed Dominic's number and he was silent. Then she called Monica. "Laurel?" Monica laughed into the phone. "Oh, you're really crazy. What a show you did." "I had problems with my mum," Laurel replied, not understanding such joy. "You don't know where Dominic is? He's not answering my calls." "And he won't answer," replied Monica unexpectedly. Dominic is mine now." "What? Yours? Monica, what are you talking about?" "Well, you ran away from the wedding," Monica grinned. "But everything was already ready. The guests, the restaurant, and most importantly, Grandpa came from France. Dominic couldn't upset him." Laurel was shocked by what she heard, but demanded an explanation from her friend, and Monica told her something Laurel had no idea about. It turns out that Dominic had a rich grandfather in France who did not like the behaviour of his grandson. Dominic was extremely promiscuous. For him, relationships were always at the level of his bed. His grandfather accused him of promiscuity and said that if within 3 months he did not find a simple girl whom he would woo beautifully and surprise, he would disinherit both his grandson and his son. And then Laurel came along, and Dominic did his best. By the way, at the beginning of their courtship, they were photographed by a detective to prove evidence to the grandfather. And now was the wedding. It seemed that the case was done, but Laurel ran away. "You're just in time," said Laurel to her friend with reproach. "No, it's just your fool," Monica laughed. "Just to let you know, Dominic and I used to date sometimes." "Yeah, that's true. We always dated when you were in your village. He told me everything." "Oh, you're a naive soul. By the way, you know there is a wedding dress rental near the wedding site. So thank you, dear friend. Now I'm Dominic's wife." Laurel hung up the phone. Tears choked her. It turns out that everything was a farce, while she thought she had met true love. Laurel no longer sought meetings with Dominic, and she dismissed her job so as not to cross paths with Monica. Every day, Laurel visited her mother, and when she was discharged, Laurel decided to return home. Laurel got a job in the regional centre, in a law office, and a month later she accidentally met Will, the same paramedic who helped her mother, and soon they began a relationship. 3 years have passed since then. Now, Laurel is on maternity leave. She and Will have a son growing up, and her mother feels better and helps Laurel with her little boy. And everything was well in their family. As for Dominic, he divorced Monica a month after the wedding and went abroad. Laurel was told about it by mutual acquaintances. Monica still lives, thinking that her beautiful life will definitely begin after 40, while Laurel no longer expects anything. She is truly happy. Karen rushed home from the farm and immediately began tidying up the house. She made pies, started soup on the stove, and shook out blankets and rugs in the yard, causing a lot of dust to fly around. Her neighbour, Mrs. Clara, peeked through the fence and asked curiously, "Hello, Karen. Why are you cleaning so thoroughly? Is there an important event coming up?" Karen wiped the sweat from her forehead and replied, "Oh, Mrs. Clara, there is. My daughter called, and she's coming home today with her city beau to introduce him to me, and he's not just any guy. Neil is from a wealthy family, so I've been busy since early in the morning." The elderly neighbour just clicked her tongue and said, "Congratulations, well done, Sandy, for catching yourself a prince. So you'll be a big shot now, huh? Be careful not to get too full of yourself." Karen sighed. "Oh, what if this groom doesn't like something? We're just simple countryside people, not on equal footing with the rich. I'm worried." In the evening, the guests arrived. Karen dressed up in a decent dress to welcome her daughter and her fiancé. However, she was needlessly nervous. Neil turned out to be a completely simple, open and sociable young man who was not arrogant at all and behaved very respectfully. He praised the meal, saying, "Thank you, everything is so delicious. It doesn't compare to restaurant food, and overall, your home is so nice and cosy." Sandy was beaming and couldn't take her eyes off her fiancé. She started an important conversation. "Mum, We came here for a reason. Neil's parents want to meet you personally because everything is serious between us. We're planning to get married. They invite you to the restaurant for dinner next week. Will you come? It's very important to me. Please understand." Karen felt a chill inside. "Oh, sweetheart, why go straight to a restaurant? We could just sit at home like a family. I'm just a milkmaid, not used to going to such places, and I don't even have decent clothes to wear. And by the way, will you be there too?" "No, my parents said that only they and you would be there, so to speak, a private meeting." Neil replied, "Don't worry so much, everything will be fine. It's only a couple of hours. After all, that's how the tradition goes. The parents have to discuss everything and get to know each other better. Soon we'll be one big family." Sandy sighed. "All right, my darlings, just for you. I'll be there. I'm so glad you met, fell in love with each other, such a good couple." After the dinner, Sandy showed Neil her childhood photos. "Look, this is me at 5. Wasn't I funny? And this is at my high school graduation. There were only 12 pupils in my class, but we were such good friends. So, how do you like it here? It must be wild, right? Little houses, forests and fields around. You know, I loved it so much as a child, when it was freezing cold outside, to climb on the couch with my cat and warm up. It was so sweet to sleep there." Neil tenderly kissed his bride-to-be. "Don't worry, my dear, I like it here. I'm okay with you coming from the village. What's the big deal? People live differently. Not everyone is as lucky as me to have rich parents. But that's not the most important thing, is it? After all, many girls in my course were interested in me. But you know, they're all like they came off an assembly line. Beautifully and fashionably dressed, battling their fake eyelashes, but they have nothing in their heads. They only dream of being taken to restaurants and given gifts. They're obsessed with their phones, taking selfies and puckering their lips like ducks. It's ridiculous. But you're different. Real. You have a subtle but such an enticing natural beauty, and you're smart. I find you so interesting. So, after our parents meet, discuss everything, I'll get my degree, and then we'll get married." Sandy was melting from such sincere words. She hugged Neil and whispered, "I love you so much, Neil. You're the best. Remember that." The moon shone dimly through the curtains. The groom had been snoring sweetly, curled up in a funny position for a long time, and Sandy lay there dreaming of their marriage, also remembering her childhood and youth. All her childhood passed in this quiet village. She grew up only with her mother, as her father Joseph died when she was only 2 years old. The girl hardly remembered him. Only the portrait in her mother's room reminded her of him. Her mother loved Sandy very much and tried to make sure her daughter was fed and dressed, saving money whenever possible. She worked as a milker, getting up early in the morning and running to the farm. Her hard work left her mother exhausted, with hurting hands from carrying heavy cans and managing the household alone. The girl felt sorry for her mother because she was so beautiful, with long blonde hair, blue eyes and dimples on her cheeks. Even now, despite years of hard work, Karen looked good. Although she had long forgotten what normal care and cosmetics meant, there was no time for outfits in the countryside. A down jacket, jeans and knee-high rubber boots. That was the whole closet. It was Karen who persuaded Sandy to go to the city after finishing school. "Sandy, my dear, go to the city. I've saved some money for you. It will be enough for now. Try to enroll. Maybe you'll find a job. What do you have to do in the village? Go to the farm? Look at me, at my hands. My legs are swollen and my veins now bulge. You didn't finish school with an honour for nothing. Maybe you'll be lucky. And if not, you can always come back. I only ask one thing of you. Be careful with guys. I understand everything, youth, passion and love. But don't rush to give yourself away without looking back. Don't jump into the abyss head first. You see for yourself how hard it was for me to raise you without a husband. So be a clever girl." And so, Sandy found herself in the big city. Although she studied excellently, she did not manage to get into full-time education. Sandy was so upset that she sobbed right on the steps of the college. Everyone had already dispersed. The building was empty, but she still sat there, not knowing what to do now. It would be shameful to return to the village. How could she even look her mother in the eye? After all, she believed in her. Stay here? And then what would she live on? Suddenly, a guard approached her, asking who she was and why she was crying. Sandy herself did not know why she told her everything. The elderly woman looked closely at the young girl, pitied her, and offered her some advice. Tears won't help you here. Rome wasn't built in a day. You're not the first and you're not the last. You didn't get into full-time, so what? Go to distance learning. It's better than nothing. I heard that a place in the library opened up. I'll ask for sure tomorrow. If it works out, I'll arrange for you to be there. They pay a little, but you'll live somehow, and the work is clean. Just be careful. If I vouch for you, don't let me down. Don't skip work. Work conscientiously. Sandy even brightened up. Oh, thank you, I agree. Don't think I'm like that. I'm a villager. My mummy raised me strictly. I'll try not to disappoint you. You came up with such a great idea. I didn't even think of a distance learning. I'll go apply for documents tomorrow. Sandy settled down slowly in the city, working diligently in the library. She even liked it because she had loved reading since she was little. Her studies were also going well, and she was nearing her diploma. It was here at her workplace that she met Neil. This guy with stylish, expensive glasses came over here to study, took a lot of literature, and studied everything from cover to cover. At first, they simply spoke politely, then became friends, and then, one day, Neil stayed up late to escort Sandy home. They didn't have to walk far, as the dormitory was nearby. Sandy smiled and said, "Thank you for walking me home. I'm not inviting you in for tea. We have a strict watchman who doesn't like strangers wandering around." Neil suddenly took her hand and said, "Sandy, I really like you. Can I take you on a date? Tomorrow at around 8 o'clock. Sandy was happy, agreed. But don't do anything foolish. Don't think that just because I'm from the village, I don't know what morals are here now. Neil laughed and put his hand to his temple. Yes, my general, no foolishness. Just movies and ice cream. Sound good? So they started dating, and there were kisses and walks under the moon. Neil took Sandy to a restaurant a few times, but she didn't like it there. It was beautiful, delicious, and had great music, but it wasn't cozy. She preferred walking along the embankment, feeding ducks and enjoying nature. The most unforgettable experience for the girl was the boat ride. She was in delight, her emotions overflowing. Meanwhile, Neil's parents became furious and disapproved of his relationship with a village girl. They believed that such girls only looked for rich fools to marry and settle down in the capital. Neil brought Sandy to his parents' luxurious house several times. But every time, his mother Faith looked at Sandy as if she wanted to incinerate her, pursing her already thin lips, so the girl hurried to leave this inhospitable home as quickly as possible. His father, George, even quarrelled with Neil, trying to explain the obvious truths to him. "Son, I saw your Sandy. What did you find in her? She's just a grey mouse, no shine, no glamour, and she's from the backwoods. Why are you hurrying to marry her? How will you support a family? And where will you even live, in her dormitory? Or will you drag her here? Your mother won't survive that. Just have fun with her for now, but nothing more, and then we'll see." Such clashes occurred more and more frequently, and Neil put the issue on the line. If they didn't stop bothering him, he would leave home. This option also did not suit his parents, as their son was the only one and beloved, and they could not lose him. And then his mother came up with a very wicked and cunning plan. Sandy's mother didn't know anything about sneaky intrigues and was preparing for a formal meeting with the future groom's parents. She asked the wife of the chairman for a beautiful dress and spent the whole night with curlers that had been lying around unused for about 20 years. Her friend did a beautiful hairstyle and light makeup and gave her pumps and a fashionable purse for the evening. Looking at herself in the mirror, Karen smiled and was satisfied with the result. And her friend just clapped her hands. "Karen, you're just a star. You're so beautiful. You're not meant to milk cows. You're meant to strut on the catwalk. Well, good luck." Karen crossed herself. "Thank you, Maggie. I'm so nervous. I'm shaking all over. I'll drink some valerian. I hope everything goes well. My heart just feels like something's not right. What am I supposed to talk to them about? I've never been to the Maldives or eaten lobster. We don't have enough money for the wedding. Will they even understand me? Well, whatever happens, happens. I'm off." After 2 hours, Karen timidly entered the expensive and pompous restaurant. She looked around and admired the mouldings on the ceiling, the reproductions of famous artists on the walls, and the overall luxury and brilliance of the place. A waiter approached her and asked, "Good afternoon, do you have a reservation?" Karen replied, "Hello, yes, number 8. My relatives should be waiting for me there." The waiter led her to the table and said, "Here is your table. Everything is already set, and the guests seem to be already celebrating. Enjoy your time." Karen looked at 6 expensive and elegantly dressed men and women who greedily ate expensive and exquisite dishes and drank wine from many years of aging. She couldn't understand what was happening or where Neil's parents were. She remembered them well, having once seen their photo, but absolutely unfamiliar people were sitting at the table. Karen touched the man sitting at the edge and asked, "Excuse me, I don't understand anything. Where are Faith and George Runette? I was told they would be waiting for me here." The man took a sip of wine and replied, "I don't know. Faith invited us to a banquet to get to know you, ordered refreshments, said you were paying for everything and then abruptly left. You're Karen, right? We were surprised by her generosity, but apparently this is how it is done where you are from. By the way, the food here is divine. The oysters are the freshest. Why don't you sit down and eat? Can I pour you some wine?" Blood rushed to Karen's head and she felt sick. What a surprise her relatives had arranged for her. She feverishly thought about how to pay for this luxurious banquet, as she didn't have extra money in her wallet. There was nothing to do but sit down and have a glass of wine to drown her sorrows. Nothing to lose. If you must go down in flames. At that time, some singer was trying to perform on stage, but she clearly had no hearing or voice, and the visitors began to whistle and shout to remove her from the stage. It was really impossible to listen to. Memories flooded Karen. After all, she too had once studied at a music school and had big hopes. Her main childhood dream was to become a singer and perform on stage. Wine and shock from what had happened hit Karen's head so hard that she suddenly stood up, walked resolutely straight to the stage, took the microphone, looked around at the audience and started singing. Suddenly, everyone in the hall fell silent. The orchestra immediately picked up the melody and played along, and the audience began to applaud. Many whispered, "This is divine! What a talent!" Such an emotional and sincere performance had never been heard in the restaurant before. Even the director ran out, and the hall exploded with applause, and people demanded more. Richard Haber, the director, ran up and asked the waiter, "Who is this? And what is she doing on our stage?" He just shrugged and said, "Just a woman who decided to sing. But her voice is really wonderful, don't you agree?" The director walked closer, looked closely and gasped. He then started clapping louder than anyone else and shouted, "Karen, you're great!" The woman, hearing the familiar voice, looked at the man and could barely stand on her feet. It was him, Richard, her first and strongest love. She blushed and stepped down from the stage. The man rushed to her and said, "Karen, what a meeting! It's been so many years, and you're still as beautiful as ever. And your voice! How did you end up here? Are you celebrating something?" Karen bitterly smiled and replied, "Yes, Richard, I'm celebrating. The last day of my life. He was surprised and said, "Come on, don't say that. Explain, what's going on?" Karen couldn't hold back her tears and suddenly burst into them. "My in-laws arranged a surprise for me. They asked me to come to the restaurant, gave me the name and table number and said that we'd get to know each other. They ordered an expensive banquet and invited strangers, and I'm supposed to pay for it. Can you imagine? They knew perfectly well that I'm a milkmaid from the village, and I don't have any money. They wanted to show off and embarrass me. Isn't it great? Are they good relatives?" Poor daughter, she doesn't suspect anything, and their son Neil seems like a normal guy. I was so happy for them. And now what? I've decided to sing my sorrows away. They'll kick me out of the restaurant anyway, and maybe they'll even call the police now. Richard called over the waiter and said, "I'll pay for this banquet. Got it? This woman is my good friend and doesn't owe anything." Karen rushed to hug her saviour. "Richard, thank you. You've saved a poor village woman from shame." At that moment, all the visitors asked for an encore, and the director said, "Karen, can I ask you to sing again for the guests? And will you come work for me? You have such a divine voice that the whole city will only come to my restaurant, and competitors will die of envy." Karen's head was spinning from everything that was happening. So many events at once, both good and bad, all mixed up. She went back on stage and sang again. The audience immediately picked up the old familiar melody and applauded at the end again. That evening, Karen didn't take the bus home. She and Richard chatted and drank wine for a long time, and then he drove her to the village, taking a promise that she would come work for him. Her daughter called her 3 times, asking about the evening. Karen's first impulse was to tell her how painful and hurtful it was, and that it probably wasn't worth tying her fate to such disgusting people. But then she remembered Neil and his kind eyes, and decided that children are not responsible for their parents, and it's not worth ruining their happiness. So Karen cheerfully replied, "Everything's fine, Sandy. Don't worry, we had a good time." Her friend Maggie rushed over in the morning, curious about everything. "Karen, open up. Are you still sleeping? What about the farm? They'll fire you. And how did it go? Were you beautiful?" Karen smiled blissfully. "Maggie, if I tell you everything, you'll never believe it. You know who I met? My first love of my life, Richard. He's the director of that same restaurant where I sang, and he offered me a job there. Can you even imagine? From a milkmaid to a singer. It's hilarious. I can't believe it myself." Maggie gasped. "No way! The one you had a romance with in music school? Come on, don't keep me in suspense. Tell me. I'm dying of curiosity." Karen laughed. "What's there to tell? I was a student, studying in the city, and he was too, in the vocal department. That's where we met. I fell in love with him right away. Couldn't get enough of him. He was so passionate, tender, impulsive, and very jealous. He'd give me bunches of roses and sing serenades, then we'd fight like cats and dogs. In short, like a volcano. And then we quarrelled over something stupid. He got jealous of me, and I was mortally offended. And we parted ways. I soon met Joseph and went home with him to the village. I gave up on everything. I was foolish, young and stupid. And yesterday, I hardly recognised him. Such a stately, respectable man. So I'm thinking, should I agree or not?" Maggie even jumped up on her chair and waved her hands. "What, are you crazy? Of course you should agree. It's like winning $1 million in the lottery. Such a chance only comes once in a lifetime. You've been dreaming of becoming a singer your whole childhood. You've been obsessed with it. So here it is. Your dream is coming true. What's there to think about?" Karen hesitated. "But what about my home? What about the farm? I'm used to it here. It's all mine. It's all home." Maggie reassured Karen, saying, "Don't worry, I'll take care of your house. I'll take your chickens to my place and also your dog. Go and don't even think about anything. Remember what you told your daughter Sandy. You can always come back. Karen decided to take a risk and moved to the city. Richard rented a cozy apartment for her near the restaurant and said firmly, "So, Karen, tomorrow you have your first working day, or rather evening, and today we are going to create an image for you. I see you don't have many dresses." Karen blushed and said, "What kind of dresses do I need in the village? I've already forgotten what they are, but I haven't earned enough money for dresses yet." Richard waved his hand and said, "Here you go. Consider this an advance. You are now the face of the restaurant. Its business card, so to speak, will keep up to a high standard." Karen realized that he was right. She needed to tidy herself up. Otherwise, it would be embarrassing to show herself in public. Richard took her first to a beauty salon and then to a boutique with fashionable clothes. Karen had never experienced such pleasure before. When the master's soft hands did facial treatments and massage for her, followed by a manicure, she was overjoyed. Then they refreshed her hair, and after 2 hours she came out an entirely different person. Richard even whistled and said, "Wow, Karen, you're irresistible. Really, I can imagine what it will be like when we dress you up." Karen was melting from such compliments. She didn't even recognize herself. Where did the worn-out dairymaid go? Now a beautiful, well-groomed lady looked at herself in the mirror. The first evening at the restaurant went great. The clients were delighted with the new singer. Her melodious voice and beautiful love songs set the mood for romance and added positive emotions. Sandy, upon hearing the news, was also happy for her mother. Finally, she would rest and really do what she loves. Richard fell in love with Karen more and more every day and started staying at work just to be with her for a little longer. But he still couldn't confess his feelings, as he had been married for a long time. Back then, after the painful breakup with Karen in his youth, his parents persuaded him to marry a wealthy heiress, Felicity. She was obsessed with money, knew her worth, and had a terribly capricious character. At first, family life seemed to be going well, but Richard dreamed of children, and Felicity refused to get pregnant. She took great care to prevent it and didn't want to ruin her impeccable figure. Over the years, they grew further apart, and his wife began drinking more and more. At first, it was harmless cocktails with friends, champagne and wine, but then more and more. In a drunken state, she behaved simply outrageously, causing wild scenes of jealousy and scandal. Richard often tried to appeal to her conscience. She seemed to come to her senses, but it didn't last long. Felicity led an idle lifestyle. She did nothing but hang out at social events and with friends. She blamed her husband for not paying enough attention to her and not being home often enough. Richard had long wanted to divorce her, but he still postponed it, realizing that she would definitely sink to the bottom. But now that he had met Karen, he couldn't bear to look at his wife, who had become a dull alcoholic. Karen's career was on the rise. She was making decent money, but she still didn't spend much on herself, saving it for her daughter's wedding. She wanted to contribute to the festive banquet so that she and her daughter wouldn't be seen as beggars. Sandy and Neil were doing fine too. The young man received his diploma, found a job, and they were preparing for the wedding with all their might. Only Faith was furious. Her insidious plan didn't work. She couldn't understand how this country woman managed to come up with so much money to pay for the expensive banquet in full. The woman fumed. "George, what are we just sitting around for? Our foolish son is really about to marry this girl from the village. Let's think about it. You have so many connections. We need to stop this. I'm not going to be related to Sandy and her mother. It's ridiculous." Faith's birthday was approaching, and she and her husband decided to celebrate it at their favourite restaurant. Of course, they didn't invite Sandy, so as not to embarrass themselves in front of distinguished guests. In the midst of the celebration, the host announced, "Dear guests, our new singer, Karen, will perform for you now. I assure you, her divine voice will not leave anyone indifferent. Everyone watched the stage with interest, and then she appeared. Karen looked magnificent in a long, tight ruby dress and exquisite shoes. Her long, beautiful, well-groomed hair streamed down her shoulders, and her eyes burned with mischievous fire as she really enjoyed her performances, putting her soul into every song. Karen sang a beautiful song about love and loyalty, and Faith looked at her in amazement. Recognizing the new singer as the familiar milkmaid, she was literally overwhelmed with waves of hatred and envy. There was only one thought in her head. How could this uncultured country bumpkin make it big? But that wasn't all. Karen recognized Faith and her husband and decided to give them a surprise in return. It was impossible to resist. When the applause subsided and the audience calmed down, Karen took the microphone again and loudly said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I take the liberty of congratulating the esteemed Faith Runette on her birthday. I have heard about her kind and responsive character, and she is truly an excellent person. Be happy. Your good deeds will surely be rewarded in full." Everyone applauded, suspected nothing, and only Faith herself blushed like a boiled crab, perfectly sensing the mockery. She wanted to grab that impudent woman by the hair right then and there, but she couldn't do that. There were respectable people all around, and she had to say thank you and applaud too. Faith drank one glass after another nervously, watching Karen's performance. She noticed that the restaurant manager personally handed her a gorgeous bouquet of roses and looked at her heartfelt. Faith seethed inwardly. Ah, now I get it. So this is our good wizard. She probably managed to sleep with the director to avoid paying for the banquet, and she even got a job for herself in the process. She's quick, just like her daughter. Never mind. I'll tell Felicity Haber about her husband's adventures on the side and his new passion, and let's see how she pulls her hair out. And I'll explain to my son that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and his Sandy is just like her mother. It's a pity he hasn't realized it yet. The next day, Faith arranged to meet Felicity at a cafe. Knowing her passion for alcohol, she ordered strong wine and began a heartfelt conversation after drinking a glass. "You see, Felicity, I really respect you, and I couldn't help but warn you. Everyone in society knows about your husband having a mistress. It's a new singer from his restaurant, some Karen. I saw her, nothing special, and her voice is quite mediocre. I don't know where your Richard found her, honestly. Sorry for saying this to you, but you should act before it's too late. I've been married for a long time myself, and it hurts me to see such a strong and happy family like yours potentially falling apart because of some rural gold digger." Felicity's face changed and she turned pale as a sheet. "Is that true? What a scoundrel! I was wondering why he's hiding his eyes from me. So that's what it's about. Thank you, Faith, for your female solidarity. I'm going to give this social climber a piece of my mind right now. She won't want to steal any other woman's husbands from the family for a long time to come." Felicity got up decisively, paid the bill, and left with an unsteady gait. Faith kept enjoying her meal alone and felt satisfied with herself. Karen's done for now. After all, many knew about Felicity's scandalous nature. That evening, Karen was preparing for her performance in the utility room when Felicity, drunk and furious, burst in on her. Felicity's eyes burned with a mad, unhealthy fire. She pounced on Karen from behind, not giving her a chance to react, and started shouting. "You peasant trash! Did you decide to steal my husband from my family? You're a bedwarmer. Richard and I have been married all our lives, and then you showed up. Now he doesn't even look at me. He doesn't even come home. So here's what. Get out of town and go back to your backwater right now. Otherwise, I'll pull out all your hair, or do something worse. Do you understand me? Richard is mine forever. Is that clear to you?" Karen fought back and shouted, "Help! You're crazy. I'm not sleeping with your husband. We're just old friends. He offered me a job, that's all. Don't believe me. Ask him yourself. I have no reason to lie." But Felicity, enraged, couldn't be stopped. She spewed obscenities and screamed throughout the restaurant. The frightened waiter rushed in at the sound of the commotion and barely managed to separate the women. He knew the director's wife had a temper and had witnessed similar scenes before, so he tried to calm her down and lead her away. Karen cried. She had been humiliated and disgraced. They mixed her up with dirt. No, she wouldn't stay here for another minute. The woman cancelled her performance, ran to her apartment, frantically packed her suitcase, leaving behind everything that Richard had bought for her, and left home on the first train. When her sleepy friend Maggie opened the door late at night and saw Karen crying, she was stunned. "Karen, what's wrong? What happened?" The woman wept and, between sobs, said, "That's it, Maggie. I've had it. I don't want anything. Give me the keys. Tomorrow I'm going back to the farm. They humiliated me and called me a bed warmer, and I never even thought of such a thing. I feel so bad." Maggie understood that she had to calm down her friend. She forced her inside, got out some sherry liqueur, poured shots and ordered, "Come on, drink up, and cry as much as you want afterward. Maybe it'll make you feel better. It always helps me in tough minutes." They sat in the kitchen for a long time, with Karen pouring out her heart, gradually becoming drunk and calming down. Curious, Maggie asked, "Karen, you still love him, don't you? I mean, that's why you were so upset." Karen nodded in agreement. "Of course I love him, Maggie. It's so much that my heart aches. Blood runs cold in my veins. But it's too late now. Richard is married, and that harpy won't let him go. So I need to forget him, to rip him out of my heart. But how? Tell me, how can I order myself to forget him, when I still remember his touch after all these years? And Sandy is his daughter. Do you understand? He's her father." Maggie was shocked. "What? You never told me that. I thought she was Joseph's daughter." Karen burst into tears again. "Everyone thought so, and so does our daughter. No one alive knew about it. When Richard and I broke up, I only realised a month later that I was pregnant. I was scared to death, and then Joseph started courting me. But then I found a way out. I chickened out. I didn't tell him anything, and then I started living with him. He was a good man, and he loved me. He was overjoyed when he found out I was pregnant. He loved Sandy and adored her, and I could never bring myself to tell him she wasn't his. That's how it is." Maggie whistled. "Wow, what a story. So what are you going to do? Joseph's been gone for a long time. Tell Richard about his daughter? He has a right to know." Karen waved her hand. "Why? It's been so many years. He's had his own family. And how will I explain it all to our daughter? No, Maggie, I don't want anything. I'll live as I have been, and that's the end of it. I wasn't meant to be a singer. It seems it wasn't my destiny." Richard was just as shocked when the waiter told him about Felicity's wild scandal and her visit to Karen. He reported that she had run away from the restaurant in tears, and no one had seen her since. To Richard, it seemed like his heart had stopped beating at that moment. He couldn't even imagine losing Karen. She had become the meaning of his life, his second breath. The man immediately rushed to the rented apartment. It was open. The keys were on the shelf in the hallway, and all the things were neatly folded on the couch. But Karen was nowhere to be found. Fool! Idiot! It's my fault for everything. I should have talked to Karen long ago, confessed my love to her, and get divorced already. And know what? I can imagine how hurt Karen is, how angry she is with me. She's been so cruelly humiliated. Richard went home in a rage. Felicity, as usual, was drinking whiskey and lounging in the armchair. The TV was loud. The man walked into the living room without taking off his shoes, turned off the TV with the remote, and said sharply to his wife, "Felicity, I know everything. Why did you start this ugly scandal? You hurt an innocent person." The drunk woman laughed insolently. "This is just the beginning. If she appears near you again, I swear I'll tear her hair out. She'll know how to steal husbands from families." Richard became furious. "From family? Felicity, wake up! Where do you see a family? We've been living like neighbours for a long time. We don't even have anything to talk about. You have only one friend. A bottle. That's it. I've had enough. We're getting divorced." Felicity jumped up from the armchair but stumbled and fell awkwardly right on the floor. Richard sighed and helped her up. The woman screamed angrily, "Mark my words, I'll sue you for everything. You'll be left with nothing. You know who my father is? I won't let you get a divorce." Richard decisively replied, "I don't care. Take everything. I have enough strength and brain to start my business again from scratch. Think about yourself. My advice to you is to take yourself in hand. You're hurting yourself. As for me, I don't want us to part as enemies." But the woman continued cursing and spewing curses at her husband and Karen. Richard looked at her in disgust for the last time and said, "Goodbye, Felicity. Live as you please." 3 weeks passed. Karen didn't live during this time. She just existed, like a robot. She went to the farm and back, fed her chicken and dog, and even cooked something. But all her thoughts were only about Richard. How she missed him, how she longed for him. She lacked his voice, burning eyes, and smile. She blamed herself for not telling the truth about her daughter. Maggie checked on her friend and encouraged her as best she could. "Karen, cheer up, eat something. You've become so thin and haggard. It's not good. Just don't think about him." Karen started crying at these words. "I can't. How can I not think about it? I love him. Only now have I realized it. I can't live without him. That's all. I don't even think that an old love could flare up with such force at 45. It's a shame." Maggie hugged her friend. "You're silly. It's good that you fell in love. You'll see. If he loves you too, he'll come for sure." It was early in the morning and Karen was still sleeping. Suddenly a car pulled up to the house and the dog barked desperately. The woman's heart was beating wildly and she went to open the door in a robe and slippers. Richard was standing on the doorstep with a huge bouquet of red roses and a suitcase. "I'm coming to you, Karen, forever. I divorced Felicity, forgave her for her wild tantrum. I love you, Karen, like back then in my youth, even more, and I won't give you to anyone else. Can I come in? You won't turn me away." Karen burst into tears and threw herself into Richard's arms. She pressed herself against him and whispered, "And I love you, and I won't let you go anywhere else. Come in, my dear. I'll run to the farm now, milk the cow, and be back soon." Richard kissed her. "You're going there for the last time, and I'm going with you. I'll help. And then we're leaving to the city forever. That's enough for you, Karen, to work so hard. Now you have me." Karen laughed. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm afraid my cows wouldn't appreciate your business suit. No, wait for me at home. Make yourself comfortable. I'll be back soon." Karen quickly finished up. She was beaming like the sun. Maggie asked her, "Why are you glowing, friend? Did you finally see your sweetheart?" Karen nodded. "Yes, I did, Maggie. He got divorced, and now he's taking me away with him. We're leaving. Oh my God, I'm so happy." Her friend hugged Karen. "See, I told you, didn't I? If he loves you, he'll come back. But did you tell him about your daughter?" "Karen, you can't keep it from him. He's her father." Karen agreed. "Yes, I haven't had a chance yet. But you're right, I can't keep it from him. I'll tell him as soon as I get home. Well, goodbye, Maggie. Her friend waved goodbye. Wishing you all the happiness, Karen. You deserve it. After her work, Karen charged in, took a shower, and already from the threshold, she smelled a delicious aroma. She looked into the kitchen and gasped. Richard, in a suit and an apron, was busy near the frying pan making an omelette. The woman laughed. "Oh, breakfast is already ready. I didn't expect it, thank you." Richard wiped his sweat. "Believe it or not, I'm the restaurant director. I didn't learn how to do it. Even this omelette has burned." They had breakfast, and Karen decided to have an honest conversation. "Richard, listen. What I'm about to say might surprise you. Sandy is your daughter. When we broke up, I realized I was pregnant, and then I met Joseph, and, he didn't suspect anything. He thought our daughter was premature, born a month earlier. He loved Sandy very much, but he died early, and only I knew that she was your daughter. That's it. I know I did something wrong and unfair, but I didn't see any other way out then." The man couldn't believe it. Tears welled up in his eyes. "Oh my God, Karen, I never hoped to become a father. Felicity never wanted to give birth, but I always wanted to have children. What happiness! But your husband died a long time ago. Why didn't you find me earlier? Why didn't you tell me? I would have left everything right away." The woman just sighed. "Well, I thought you had your own family. Why bother you with all this? And who knows whether you would have believed me or not. And now, how do I tell Sandy about this? She thinks Joseph is her father, even though she doesn't remember him at all. But still, how do I explain all this to her? And what will she think of me?" Richard approached Karen, hugged her, and kissed her passionately, then whispered, "Karen, you're making life too complicated. Everything will work out on its own. You'll see. Just don't rush." From that very day on, Karen's life changed radically. As if in the fairy tale about Cinderella, whom the handsome prince finally found and tried on the slipper. She and Richard moved to the city and started living in the same rented apartment. Felicity managed to take everything away except for the restaurant, but that didn't scare them. Karen continued to sing, clients enjoyed it, and the business only grew. Richard met Sandy and Alexei. He watched his daughter and found his traits in her, a mole above her eyebrow, the same slightly sticking out ears, and his gaze. And one day, when he couldn't take it any more, he decided to talk to her. He waited for Sandy to finish work and approached her. "Sandy, let's sit down. I need to talk to you seriously. I don't know how to beat around the bush, so I'll just tell you straight. I'm your father. Your real father. Don't think I'm a scoundrel or that I left you. No, I just recently found out about this secret from your mother." Sandy was in shock and blinked frequently. "How can you be my father? I don't understand anything. And my dad, Joseph, who is he then?" "No, that's not true. Mum never—" The man interrupted suddenly. "I know, Sandy, your mother never told anyone about this, and she probably had her reasons. Don't judge her harshly. Your mother and I once loved each other just as strongly as you and Neil do. Do you understand? It's just that I was a jealous fool, and your mother is very sensitive. That's why we drifted apart. But recently we accidentally ran into each other at a restaurant. Believe it or not, I fell in love with Karen again. Or rather, I realized that I never stopped loving her, and everything in my soul turned upside down. I understand that at our age it probably looks funny and ridiculous from the outside. Sandy, I am delighted that you are my daughter. I know that time has passed and you are no longer a child, but we can make up for lost time, can't we?" Sandy moved closer to Richard and took his hand. "I don't mind. And I'm only happy for you and Mum. Thank you for taking her out of the rural routine and falling in love at your age. It's not nonsense. It's wonderful." Richard hugged his daughter. Neil and Sandy were drinking tea at his place when she told him all the news about her family. He was just amazed. Faith entered and frowned when she saw her future daughter-in-law. But her son immediately stunned her. "Mum, you won't believe it. Sandy isn't just the daughter of a milkmaid anymore. She's a rich heiress. Her father is a famous restaurateur, Richard Haber. How about that twist, huh? Maybe now you'll finally calm down and stop putting sticks in our wheels. Neil laughed, watching his mother's facial expressions as she went through a range of emotions: shock, surprise, shame, and awkwardness. Sandy was also amused, knowing her future mother-in-law would be kinder to her now. Faith quickly regained her composure, smiled sweetly, and said gently, "Okay, am I against it? Get married. You kids, we're all for it. I always said Sandy was smart. She'll make a good wife and homemaker." The young people burst out laughing because the woman seemed to have been replaced. One day, while preparing for the wedding, Sandy had the idea. "Mum, Dad, let's have a double wedding. Just imagine, Mum and I are walking down the aisle together. It will never be forgotten. Plus, we only have to have one banquet. It's a total savings." Karen blushed. "I don't know, at my age, it's embarrassing to walk down the aisle. I thought that Richard and I would quietly sign the papers and that's it. Otherwise people will laugh." Richard interrupted her. "No way, my dear. When I was young, I lost my beloved. Let me make up for it now. You didn't have a wedding with Joseph either, did you? And every woman's life should have at least one white wedding dress. So, I'm all for it. Let's surprise the whole city. And what about the people? I don't care about them. This is only our life, and it doesn't concern anyone else." The wedding day arrived, and Richard and Neil couldn't take their eyes off their loved ones. They were so happy. Sandy chose a lush flowing dress with a petticoat and a long veil, making her look like a princess giving a ball. Karen, on the other hand, wore a tight-fitting, long, snowy rhinestone-embroidered dress and pinned flowers instead of a veil, organically weaving them into her hairstyle. They both looked stunning. Sandy whispered to Karen, "Mummy, do you believe this? A few years ago we lived in the village and you milked cows. And now we're in a fancy restaurant, and we're both marrying the most loved and reliable men. Pinch me. This is some kind of fairy tale. I don't believe it." Karen hugged her daughter and said, "I can't believe it myself, dear. I'm even afraid to sleep at night. What if I wake up in the morning and all of this isn't real? I never expected to meet Richard again. So your mother-in-law helped me with this. If it weren't for that meeting in the restaurant, none of this would have happened. They say there is a silver lining behind every cloud." Meanwhile, Faith and George tried to make up with Richard and Karen to repair their previously damaged relationships. Only now did they realize that people cannot be judged by their clothes and social status. Karen and Richard were not vindictive people. Karen approached Faith peacefully and said, "Well, let's drink to the happiness of our children. Or are you still not happy about this wedding?" Faith blushed and lowered her eyes, saying, "Forgive me, Karen, for how cruelly I treated you back then. I don't know what came over me. I was possessed. And now I'm very ashamed and scared, because I could have destroyed my son's happiness with my own hands. It's a good thing Neil was smarter than my husband and me and stood firm on his own, defending his right to love." Karen smiled and said, "You know, Faith, believe it or not, I'm even grateful to you for it. Honestly. First, if I hadn't come to the restaurant then, I'd never have met Richard. And secondly, if you hadn't had a terrible scandal with Felicity, Richard and I wouldn't have dared to confess our love to each other for a long time. So, everything turned out for the best. I'm not upset, but let's stop here. Now we're one family, and I want there to be peace and quiet in it. Agreed?" Faith joyfully raised her glass and said, "Agreed." "Great, damn it," muttered Melanie, realizing that she had stepped in gum. The pink sticky mess had firmly attached itself to her shoe and refused to come off. Frustrated, Melanie kicked the curb so hard that her thin heel broke with a crack. However, the gum remained stubbornly stuck to her now useless shoe. "Oh, come on!" Melanie said it loudly, almost crying in annoyance. Nothing ever went right in her life. Instead of going to college, Melanie wanted to live off someone else's wealth. She took advantage of her natural gifts, her striking looks and youth, and got involved in escorting. However, this field was fraught with not only money, but also a million problems. Sometimes she encountered horrible clients who believed that they could do anything for money, using Melanie like a puppet. That's why, after 2 years, she ran away from it all without looking back. However, Melanie's habits did not change. She still sought wealthy men, but for long-term relationships. However, they rarely ended well. Recently, she started a romance with her boss, but soon his couch potato wife found out about it. Instead of staying with the young and beautiful Melanie, the idiot decided to fire her and beg for forgiveness from the mother of his children. You see, he didn't want to break up the family, but he didn't mind sleeping with Melanie on the office couch and depriving her of a legitimate lunch. Oh, what a scoundrel. Melanie gritted her teeth, remembering her boss. Now the girl was trying to find a job again, or at least a sponsor. She was on her way to an interview at one of the companies, but didn't make it to the office building. "How am I supposed to get there now?" she grumbled, looking at her broken heel. This scene unfolded at the doors of a luxurious hotel. Politicians, stars and businessmen stayed there, and influential people came here for lunch. But Melanie didn't have the money to even buy a glass of water in this place. Suddenly, Melanie was drawn to a ringing laugh. A woman dressed in an expensive designer dress got out of a taxi. She looked incredible, and Melanie immediately noticed that the blonde had a legendary Birkin bag. Made Melanie's mouth water. Melanie could tell at a glance that it was an original, not a knockoff from the market. However, Melanie was shocked, most of all, not the woman's clothes, but her face. "Denise?" Melanie gasped, not believing her eyes. She even took off her sunglasses, thinking they were obstructing her view and showing her some absurdity instead of reality. The blonde turned around and, seeing Melanie frozen next to her, joyfully exclaimed, "Melanie, is that really you?" Denise rushed to the girl, hugging her tightly. Melanie, however, continued to blink in confusion and examine her old friend. Melanie and Denise were from the same orphanage. They even lived in the same room and slept in neighbouring beds. Denise was brought to the orphanage from some remote village by her grandmother, who had since passed away. Melanie, on the other hand, ended up in state custody due to her mother's preference for her stepfather over her own daughter. Both girls were 8 years old at the time, but that was the only thing that united them. Melanie didn't like to remember her past, so she tried to avoid old acquaintances. However, she couldn't pass by Denise, at least not because she was in shock. The woman standing in front of her only resembled Denise, with her naive gaze and sincere smile, which Melanie always thought was too broad. Other than that, the blonde had changed. She had lost weight, her cheekbones were no longer round like a hamster's, and her cheekbones stood out. Her blonde hair, the colour of linen, was styled in curls, and she no longer wore the huge plastic-rimmed glasses. Melanie wasn't particularly fond of her roommate. Their characters were too different. She considered Denise's naivety and kindness a weakness and called her a grey mouse. "Oh, I can't believe even this grey mouse has married. Where did she find such a rich groom? In the library?" Melanie gritted her teeth, noticing the engagement ring on her former roommate's finger. It sparkled in the sunlight with a heart-shaped diamond cut that was larger than 1 carat. Denise, unaware of Melanie's envious thoughts, was happy to meet her. "I haven't seen you in so long. You look so beautiful." "Well, you were always a beauty," said the woman enthusiastically. Melanie mentally snorted, not believing Denise's sincerity. The more she looked at her, the stronger her envy raged. "Did you come for lunch too?" Denise asked hopefully, nodding towards the hotel door. Melanie was only taken aback for a second, then nodded briskly. "Yes, but I had an emergency," she said, pointing to her shoe. "I don't think I'll pass the dress code." "You will," Denise reassured her. "This is my husband's hotel, so consider yourself my guest. You can even come in barefoot." This news left Melanie stunned. However, she always thought quickly when it came to possible benefits. She was a parasite who could definitely determine to whom to cling to get her piece of happiness. Melanie felt that she had to smile at Denise as wide as possible. She hoped that despite her external changes, Denise had remained a naive country bumpkin. In the dim light of the restaurant, the women started talking. Melanie was asking her friend with keen interest how she turned into a lady. "You were going to work as a translator, weren't you?" Melanie asked, recalling their past. "That's true, I am a translator," the girl said. "After graduation, I got a job at an agency that provides translators for business events. That's where I met Robert McClarty." "And what, did the big shot fall in love with you?" Melanie tried to contain her sarcasm, but it didn't come out well. Fortunately, Denise, who had surrendered to memories of her husband, did not notice it. "Well, you could say that," the woman laughed, taking a sip of green tea. "The thing is, during my studies, I learned not only German, but also French and Chinese. When I arrived at the meeting, I became an unwitting witness to someone else's conversation. Robert's potential partners planned to set him up. It turned out that they bribed a lawyer to forge documents. I hurried to Robert and told him everything. Of course, the deal didn't go through. In gratitude, Robert invited me to dinner, and then everything just happened." The woman blushed shyly, and Melanie, stuffing a piece of dessert into her mouth, which cost here like a wing from a Boeing, suppressed her snort. Denise told her that her husband was currently aiming for the post of deputy in their city, and Denise worked as an assistant and translator, but she hoped to go on maternity leave soon. "It's just that we haven't been able to have a baby yet," Denise complained, embarrassed, "but I signed up for a clinic to get checked. We won't give up, of course." That is not fair, Melanie thought, poking at the remains of her dessert with a fork and listening to her friend. She had no looks or charm. She smiles like a dummy. She has so much money. She could have plastic surgery. Is Robert blind or something? Then a sudden thought struck Melanie. What if she just took Robert away, and she could have a child for him if needed? Melanie, feeling encouraged, reached for her purse and then groaned. "Oh no, I think I forgot my wallet," she said sadly. "Melanie, don't even think about it." Denise waved her hand. "They won't ask for money from us here." "I feel so embarrassed," said Melanie, looking down, then sighed and added, "I was actually going for an interview. There was a conflict at my last job. It's even shameful to tell. I'm afraid you'll misunderstand." Denise hurried to assure her friend that she would definitely understand and not judge her. After a few more sighs, Melanie whispered dramatically, "My boss fell in love with me. He had a wife and 2 children, so I refused him right away. But he started blackmailing me, and then he fired me, and then he began to spread rumours. So I'm afraid a bad reputation might follow me." "How awful!" Denise exclaimed. "But you're smart not to give in." Melanie nodded and went on sadly. "But my principles have cost me dearly. I lost my job and I have less and less money. I rent an apartment in the centre, but they might ask me to leave." Melanie complained, omitting the fact that her former lover paid for the luxurious apartment. "And today, when I was going for an interview for a secretary position, I broke my heel." "Melanie, maybe it's fate." Denise smiled irritatingly wide again. "My Robert is just looking for a secretary. Diana is going on maternity leave in a month. She could teach you." Melanie didn't refuse her friend's offer for long. The next day, in her best dress, whose length was on the verge of a foul, she appeared in the office of Denise's husband. The girl spent the entire day hanging around the chief's office, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious Robert McClarty. Her wish was granted, and Melanie saw the boss. Her heart began to beat faster. She had already searched for information about the man online, but in person, he was even more handsome than in the photos. The brunette was a model of male sexuality and attractiveness. His grey suit fit him perfectly, making his grey eyes even more captivating. The man had dark, thick hair, a strong chin, a wide lower jaw, and prominent cheekbones. He looked like he had stepped off the cover of a glossy magazine. "Melanie, right?" He smiled, bringing the girl out of her stupor and extending his hand. "How are you settling in?" Melanie shook the boss's hand while charmingly smiling. "Wonderful, thank you. I'm truly grateful to you for the opportunity." "Oh, you can thank Denise for that. She whispered in my ear that I should take care of you." Hearing these words, Melanie promised herself, "I'll take care of you too." The man invited the new employee into his office and explained the scope of her work, promising that Diana would help her in the beginning. So, Melanie began working with Denise and her husband. She often went to lunch with Denise, carefully playing the role of a grateful and sincere friend. A week later, Melanie asked to visit the McClartys, where she began to appear more and more often. Melanie wore seductive outfits, carefully applied makeup, complimented the man, and offered to let him evaluate the new perfume that she had applied to her neck. In general, she used many tricks. However, the man did not see her hints or simply ignored them, making the brunette grind her teeth in anger. A whole month of Melanie's attempts to seduce the boss passed when she decided to take a desperate step. The entire office was buzzing because the elections were around the corner. Robert was on alert because of some tricks by his competitors. When Melanie knocked and entered his office, he was scolding someone on the phone. "I don't want to use the same dirty methods. However, you leave me no choice. And if you dirt on me, which you feed the journalists, is pure fiction, then I have information about your son, who was treated in a clinic for addiction, ran away from home, and avoided arrest for a fatal accident. God knows, I don't want to involve a child, even an adult, but you leave me no choice." The man, annoyed, hung up the phone. Melanie mentally smirked. She would easily break the laws of morality and go after other people's heads to achieve her goal. And actually, that's what she planned to do. "Robert, I brought you coffee," she said, putting the cup on the table. "Thank you, Melanie." The man nodded wearily, rubbing his face. The girl shifted from one foot to the other, not leaving the office. The man looked at his secretary and asked, "Anything else, Melanie?" The woman nodded, lowered her gaze to the floor, and began to twist her fingers, as if she were very embarrassed to start a conversation. "I heard your conversation, and I saw the fakes that your competitors spread," she said, not looking at the boss. "I think it would be fair to tell you something important. I'm afraid if the media finds out first, it will be worse. Although I really don't want to betray Denise, so please don't give me away." Robert frowned. "I don't understand you." Melanie sat on the edge of the chair and, leaning forward, blabbered, "Denise and I were in the same orphanage. After that, she got into bad company and tried to get me involved. Denise learned languages not to become a translator. She worked as an escort with foreigners, providing accompaniment and more intimate services. She offered this job to me, but I was scared and refused. We were students, very young, but I know for sure that she was in this field for a long time." Robert looked at the secretary with shock and disbelief, as Melanie hurried to reinforce her argument. "Recently, Denise said she couldn't get pregnant. She said confidentially, I think this is related to her past. Of course, I'm certain that this kind of lifestyle is in the past. Denise has changed, but if you once walked the wrong way, you have to be prepared to account for your actions, right? I'm just so invested in you and the team's work that I don't want our efforts to go to waste." "This is nonsense," the man muttered. Melanie shrugged her shoulders. "It's my job to warn you. The main thing is that Denise's skeletons don't come out of the closet at the wrong time." She then pulled out a folder of documents and put a medical certificate in front of her boss. "This is a certificate from the hospital showing the sexually transmitted infections she was being treated for. It's old, of course, and I'm sorry, but I know that Denise had an abortion in her second year." "Where did you get this?" The man looked at the medical document with shaking hands. "As I explained earlier, we were friends in the past. Believe me, I'm only saying this because I know how much you want a child and value your reputation." Melanie's voice trembled and tears filled her eyes. She leaned forward and touched the man's hand. To her relief, he didn't pull away, but sat there like a statue. "That's not all," Melanie breathed. "There's a video of her, for adults. I wasn't sure if it still existed, but I managed to find it. It was circulating among our classmates at the time. Maybe it can be removed from the internet. I'm worried someone will see Denise in such a role." "Video? Show me," Robert croaked, and Melanie showed the man the clip. The video was of poor quality, but the face of the main character clearly belonged to Denise, while the man's face was not visible. Robert barely held back from throwing the phone against the wall. He was horrified. He remembered his wife's face. Her words were not about being able to get pregnant and not understanding why. The future deputy also imagined what would happen if such information fell into the hands of journalists. This wasn't just a stain on his reputation. No, his good name would be gone. He married an escort, for goodness sake. Part of his election campaign was built around the fact that his wife was a loved woman with a difficult fate. Denise was from a village, spent her childhood in an orphanage, and saved his business from a bad deal. She was close to the people, and the story appealed to voters because it reminded them of a modern-day fairy tale about Cinderella. Watching the clip of his moaning young wife, Robert didn't understand what he should do now. The depressed man had no idea that even though the whole story was real, it was not about Denise. Melanie revealed a shameful part of her own biography to him. Even the medical documents were hers, but she forged them for Denise. The video clip was a skilled montage for which deceitful Melanie paid a lot of money, but she was confident that it would pay off. Melanie didn't even know that modern neural networks could create such realistic videos. Yes, the body wasn't very similar to Denise's, but who knows what she was like in college. "I'll go, Robert," the girl said sadly, and he just nodded. As Melanie left her boss's office, she smiled. However, she wasn't going to stop there. The woman took her phone and called a news portal that always published scandalous news. "Hello," Melanie greeted the interlocutor. "How much will you offer me for a very interesting and exclusive video?" When Denise came home, she was glowing from the inside. However, the mansion was quiet and dark. Thinking that her husband hadn't returned, Denise went to the kitchen and, turning on the light, gasped in horror. "Robert, you scared me. What are you doing in the dark?" The man didn't respond. He looked terrible and was swaying on his bar stool. A nearly empty bottle of whiskey sat in front of him. "Are you drinking?" Denise asked in surprise as she took off her jacket. "On a Monday? Did something happen at work?" "Something happened," he grumbled. "I got married." Denise furrowed her brow, taken aback by her husband's tone. She had never heard him like this before. The woman approached her husband, trying to cheer him up by touching his shoulder, but he brushed her hand away as if she were a bug. "Don't touch me. It's disgusting for me." "What are you saying?" Denise exclaimed, offended. "Okay, that's it. Stop drinking." She tried to take the remaining whiskey, but the man grabbed the bottle from her and threw it on the floor. Denise screamed as the shards scattered across the tiles. "Get away from me. Got it?" the drunk man yelled. "How could you?" You're who... He stopped, unable to finish his insult. Denise was crying, pressing her hands to her lips. "Robert, what's wrong with you?" she kept asking, not understanding anything. "What's wrong?" the man said in rage. He showed her the video clip. "I've seen it. I watched it about 200 times. Do you have any more of these?" Denise, watching the video, went pale. "Robert, it's not me. Probably your competitors are digging at you again. I've never—" "Get out of my house," Robert shouted. "Do you hear me? I don't believe you. I don't want to see you. You ruined my life. I've kept a snake on my chest." Denise tried to reason with him, but he pushed her roughly, and Denise had to leave the house in tears. She sat behind the wheel of her car and drove off, dialing her friend's number, but Melanie didn't answer. Denise thought in passing that she didn't even have time to share the big news with her husband, and now it didn't mean anything. Denise couldn't stop crying. "Melanie, answer the phone," she begged, needing support. "Hello?" Melanie's voice came over the line suddenly. "Melanie, Damn!" Denise began to speak, but the phone slipped from her trembling hands. She heard Melanie calling her. She leaned over to grab her smartphone and the car swerved. A passing truck honked, scaring Denise. She gasped, twisted the wheel, and crashed into a pole, losing consciousness. Robert couldn't open his eyes. He couldn't remember how much he drank the night before, but his head was splitting. He turned on his side and tried to find his wife in bed, but her side of the bed was empty. A sad reality hit him. He got up, looking around, and realized that he had driven Denise away. Oh, he was so wrong. He had flown off the handle from stress and alcohol. He had to figure everything out. Robert grabbed his phone, noticing several missed calls, but not from Denise. Calling the number back, he heard the voice of a doctor. "Your wife was in an accident, and she is in the hospital now. However, she has regained consciousness. The pregnancy is not at risk." Robert didn't understand what shocked him more, that his wife was in the hospital after an accident, or that she was pregnant. He immediately got dressed and ran to the hospital. As soon as he rushed into his wife's room and saw the bandage on her head, Robert fell to his knees. "It's my fault, Denise. When I heard about the accident, my heart almost stopped. If something had happened to you, I would never have forgiven myself. I don't need any deputy posts. I love you. Please forgive me. And the past, I don't care about it anymore." Denise shook her head and smiled her beautiful wide smile, which Robert loved so much. "You won't have to leave your post," she said. "Remember, Clark, my old friend whom we helped, he's a journalist now. He called me because they received a video with my participation and were offered to publish it. He paid to redeem the video, but then he immediately called me. He's on his way now." When the journalist arrived, everything fell into place. "I didn't believe in this video right away," said Clark, causing Robert to feel embarrassed for having believed Melanie's words right away. "Now there's a lot of this stuff. It's called deep fake. I decided to find the original, and I'm sure it's not you, Denise. Then I traced the number of the calling woman, and here's what I found." To Robert's lack of surprise, that woman was Melanie. Denise gasped, not wanting to believe in such a low act of betrayal. Being a kind person, Denise wanted to forgive Melanie and send her on her way. But Robert was tired of being good. He sent Melanie in a very specific direction, to the courtroom for defamation. Although the girl got off with a hefty fine and mandatory work, Robert was satisfied. He didn't have time to deal with the inadequate intriguer. He was taking care of his pregnant wife and promised that he would always trust his beloved Denise from now on. Billy woke up to the sound of dishes clattering in the kitchen. He stretched, jumped off the couch and got dressed. "Mum, why did you get up so early again? I'm not 5 years old. I can make myself an omelette and pour a cup of tea." "Go wash your face, son. When you get married, I'll finally be able to relax. Your wife will cook for you and get you ready for work. I know you have breakfast by eating a sandwich with sausage and rushing to work, and then you spend the whole day behind the wheel. Can't eat properly or rest. Why are you starting again in the morning? Get married, muttered Billy, washing and combing his hair in front of the mirror. He didn't know how to explain to his mum that modern girls dream of a prince in a white Mercedes with a huge bank account and plenty of apartments. Billy was still living with his mother at the age of 30 and working as a bus driver. Of course, if he wanted to, he could save up money and buy a separate apartment with a mortgage, but he didn't want to move away from his mum right now. A 2-room apartment for the 2 of them was even too spacious, and he didn't want to leave his mum alone. She was a pensioner and it was already difficult for her to go shopping, and he carried heavy bags. Besides, it was much nicer to come home where you were expected. If only there weren't these constant talks about marriage. A picture from the recent past appeared before his eyes. He stood with a bouquet of peonies from the home garden at the entrance, and his beloved girl jumped out of a chic car with a bunch of burgundy roses. With difficulty hugging the huge bouquet, she, not noticing him, ran past and disappeared into the entrance. There were no explanations, tearful goodbyes. She just stopped answering his calls. He already guessed that it was all over, but after this scene, she stopped calling and coming. When she appeared on his doorstep after 6 months with declarations of love, he didn't yell or accuse her of infidelity. He just reminded her that everything between them had long been over. Indeed, there was no love left, only a dull pain remained. And although several years have passed, Billy has not met anyone else, and his mother still could not calm down. People say that if a man doesn't get married by the age of 30, he will remain a bachelor. I've been dreaming of grandchildren, my dear son. Can't I enjoy them while I still have the strength and health? You're a tall, handsome, hard-working and kind man. Any girl would be lucky to have you, if you proposed to her. Mum, why are you talking about brides again in the morning? Did you have some kind of dream or something? He tried to change the subject. Oh, what did I dream about today? The mother began to remember. While she was retelling her latest dream to him, he quickly ate breakfast, got dressed, said goodbye to her and went to work. Today was a grey and heavy day. It was a dark, cold October, when there was no sparkling white snow yet, and the golden leaves had already fallen. Here it is, the familiar bus. Another workday begins. The trip is half an hour, and it's a weekday, so there are plenty of people. The bus was overcrowded, and there was no room to move. The departure time was approaching, and Billy was about to sit behind the wheel when he heard screams in the cabin. Oh, you shameless one, get up, I say. My legs can barely walk and the bag is heavy. Give me your seat, shouted a full elderly woman. The youth are completely ill-mannered now. They don't respect elders at all, someone from the bus supported. I'm old. Your mother is old. The elderly woman was offended. But she should still give up her seat. She'll sit at her college, but when I get home, I won't have a free minute. I have chickens and cats. I need to cook and do the laundry, and at least I hope to sit a little on the bus. And it's my right. I'm disabled, and healthy people need to give up their seats to people with disabilities. Billy squeezed into the cabin and finally saw the culprit of the scandal, a pale, unhappy girl who seemed about to faint. Woman, don't shout. Billy began to calm her down. See, the girl is not feeling well. She can't even stand up. Her lips have turned pale. Girl, can I bring you some water or call a doctor? Billy opened the window and a stream of cold air rushed into the cabin. Passengers sympathized. Someone started offering medications, heart or sedatives, but the girl refused. She got up to take a breath of fresh air. A minute later it became visible that she felt better, and her cheeks turned pink. "Thank you, I can't take medicine, I'm pregnant." Indeed, when she stood up, everyone saw her noticeably round belly. Passengers, who had already begun to sympathise with the girl, unanimously hissed at the elderly woman who had caused the scandal. She started to justify herself. "Well, who knew? She doesn't look pregnant, she's skinny and small. She should play with dolls, not raise children. And I'm really disabled, I have the right to demand a seat." Billy, realising that time was running out, quickly made a decision. "Girl, you sit, don't get up. You can't strain yourself and we'll find you a seat now." He looked around the bus. Near the window, a little further away, sat a guy with headphones. It was evident that he had dozed off because he paid no attention to what was happening on the bus. Billy touched his shoulder. "Young man, give up your seat," to the woman. He spoke up and at first seemed not to understand what was happening. Billy signalled him to remove his headphones. When he did, he explained that he needed to give up his seat to the disabled person. The guy didn't argue, immediately got up and moved to the window. The elderly woman, pleased that she had won her place, turned to the girl. "Don't be mad at me, darling. Take it. You need vitamins. I bought it for myself on the road," she said, and handed her a large red apple. But the girl shook her head and said she didn't want it. Angrily biting her lips, the woman sat in the vacant seat, took her big bag next to her, and began to look out the window. Billy, noticing that everything was calm, made his way to his seat. He didn't like being late, but due to the conflict, he had to delay a bit. It was just another day on the route. Passengers were boarding and disembarking, and the road stretched ahead like an endless ribbon. The final stop was approaching, and there were only 2 to 3 passengers left on the bus. It was lunchtime, and there were 2 hours of rest ahead. Already thinking about a hot bowl of soup at the local cafe, Billy was about to leave the bus when he noticed that there was still 1 passenger left on the bus, a pregnant woman. "This is the final stop, we have arrived," the driver announced. But instead of getting off the bus, the girl burst into tears. Billy was perplexed and didn't know what to do. Of course, he had encountered all sorts of things on his trips. Once, a passenger was robbed, and he drove him to his destination and gave testimony. Another time, a man got on the wrong bus due to confusion with the address, and Billy drove him back without a ticket. But at least in those cases, it was clear what to do. But how could he help this unfortunate young woman who looked like a teenager, really? He handed her his handkerchief. "Take it, it's clean." She shook her head. "What's your name? Who did you come to see? Give me the address and I'll help you find your relatives." However, the girl just cried harder. Realizing that he couldn't talk to her, he took her hand. "Shall we go to the cafe together? You haven't eaten anything since this morning. I'll have lunch myself and buy something for you. Then we'll figure it out." The girl wasn't dressed like a vagrant. Her clothes were nice, one might even say expensive. She had a small bag with her belongings. Yes, she had paid for her ticket, so she had money. Maybe she had a fight with her husband. Ran away from home? She needs to be calmed down, Billy thought. We'll have lunch and she'll tell us everything. We'll call her husband or at least her parents. Someone will come for her. Young, foolish and pregnant, they say they all have hormones and they make thoughtless decisions. On the one hand, he was annoyed that instead of the long-awaited hours of rest, he would be solving someone else's problems. But on the other hand, he understood perfectly well that the girl needed help, and Billy couldn't just leave her alone in the middle of the street. He never got to have lunch that day. Suddenly the girl screamed in pain and doubled over. Then she whispered, "I need to go to the hospital. It seems like it started." Billy couldn't help but curse loudly, but then he realized that he needed to act. Otherwise, he would have to deliver the baby himself, and he was definitely not ready for that. He stopped a passerby and asked where the local maternity hospital was. After listening to the explanation, he shouted to the girl, "I'll take you to the hospital now. Do you have any documents?" "It's in the bag," whispered the girl, writhing in pain. Billy grabbed her purse and drove her to the nearby hospital, listening to her groans. He helped her walk to the emergency department and explained the situation as best he could. The nurse who greeted them was calm and collected. "Don't worry, Daddy, everything's okay." "She's about to give birth, do something," Billy answered worriedly. "Everything's fine, calm down. No one gives birth that fast. What's your wife's name? Surname?" Billy handed the nurse the girl's purse and said, "I'm not her husband. I don't know her. She's a passenger on my bus. She went into labour during the last trip. I brought her here. Her documents should be here." "Okay, we'll figure it out, but still tell us your name and phone number, just in case." Billy provided his details. By that time, the woman had been taken to the maternity ward. After completing all the formalities, Billy left the hospital feeling relieved. He was glad everything turned out okay, but he was still worried about the woman. Who was she? Why was she here all alone? He would probably never find out. In the evening, after returning from work, he thought about his strange passenger for a long time. He couldn't even sleep, remembering her tearful, sad, but incredibly beautiful eyes. He was already about to call the maternity hospital to find out who was born and whether everything was okay with her, but he remembered that he didn't ask for her name or surname. The next day, when he went back to work, he couldn't stop thinking about the woman. As his mother would say, she had captured his heart. He had almost decided to go to the hospital, find the nurse who had processed the documents, and ask about the girl when the phone rang. "Congratulations, your son was born." "What kind of joke is this?" Billy answered the phone in surprise. "Your wife, whom you brought to the hospital yesterday, Cheryl Coleman, gave birth to a healthy boy weighing 4 kilos. You can visit your wife and don't forget to bring a gown, slippers and diapers for the baby. Maybe there's something else you need. Talk to the doctor." Billy's mood instantly improved. He asked for the ward number and promised to come at noon. And as soon as he was free, he bought everything he was asked and went to the hospital. When the nurse found out who he had come for, she was glad. "Oh, this is the woman with no relatives or acquaintances. She was just saying today that she had no one. So, you're probably the dad. Your son was born strong. Cheryl had been crying all day. We were so afraid that the milk would disappear because of the stress. She said she had nowhere to go." 10 minutes later, Cheryl was telling him her sad story. It turned out to be commonplace. She went to study, met a guy, got pregnant, and he started dating her best friend. She caught them in bed, couldn't forgive either of them, dropped out of college and went home, but didn't tell anyone what had happened to her. She simply said she would enroll in another college. She hid her pregnancy until the very end. Her mother had died a long time ago, and her father didn't notice until her belly became huge. When acquaintances began to ask whom they were expecting, a boy or a girl, her father finally realized what was happening. There was a terrible scandal. After that, Cheryl packed a few things, took her documents and left home. What kind of father is he? Billy thought. Probably some drunkard. How could he not notice that his daughter was pregnant and about to give birth? But he didn't say anything about it. He simply suggested, "You can stay with me for a while, then we'll figure out what to do. You can't go out on the street with a child. Please let me know when you're discharged and I'll come and pick you up." He just put the facts in front of her by bringing the girl and the baby. "Mom, this is Cheryl. She'll stay with us for a while." At first, Mrs. Webster was surprised, but then she immediately began to fuss. "Come in, daughter. Come in. Undress. Let's have some tea. Let me hold your handsome newborn for a while." Cheryl and the baby were given a separate room. Billy moved temporarily to his living room. When Cheryl and her child slept, he told his mother her story. She just shook her head. Okay, if it were a bride, but this is a stranger's child, a stranger woman. Why, son, you need to think about your own family, and you don't even know if they're any good. Maybe she's a thief or something else. What if she abandons the child and leaves? Why do we need this headache? Mum, she's not an alcoholic or a thief. Billy hesitated. Where do I take her? Kick her out onto the street? Perhaps she'll go back to her father later, but for now let her stay. Mrs. Webster grumbled for a long time, but eventually came to terms with her son's decision. Gradually, she grew attached to Cheryl and her son, whom she named Jeremy. One day she even said to her son, Billy, it's obvious that she's a good girl, educated, well-mannered, with a kind heart but with a child. Marry her and give me grandchildren. Billy didn't say anything, just smiled. He himself wouldn't mind becoming her husband. Almost 6 months had passed. He had gotten used to Cheryl and little Jeremy, and the girl had become attached to him. From the outside, they looked like an ordinary family. The February day that was supposed to be the happiest day of his life became one of the hardest. On February the 14th, he came home with a huge bouquet of roses, asked his mother to look after Jeremy, and prepared a romantic dinner for Cheryl. When they sat at the table by the flickering candles, he proposed to her. Billy hoped she would agree, but the woman became embarrassed, blushed, and went into her room. He took it as a refusal, threw the prepared bouquet on the floor, and left with his friends to a bar. He usually didn't drink, but this time he drank so much that he couldn't stand on his feet. He didn't remember how he ended up at home. The whole day seemed to have fallen out of his memory. He woke up in his bed. His mother was bustling nearby. Son, did you quarrel with Cheryl or something? Billy had a headache and didn't want to explain anything. The house was suspiciously quiet. Where's Cheryl? Where's Jeremy? He asked. I was going to ask you the same thing. When we were at our neighbour's with Jeremy, Cheryl came and took him. We hadn't finished talking and I stayed at her place. But when I came back, neither she nor the child were home, and the next morning your friends brought you over. For several days Billy was sad and resentful. He was sure that cunning Cheryl had taken advantage of his kindness and left, and his friends agreed. You can't trust these women. His mother was also disappointed. She seemed so well-mannered and sweet. I already loved her like a daughter, and we took her in with the baby. She came to us with just one suitcase. It's a good thing she didn't steal anything. Although I did write down her passport information and address, we would still have found her. Mum, do you have her address? Billy asked anxiously. Yes, she replied. Give it to me. I'll go see her. Why, son? I want to look her in the eye and ask her why she did this to me, and I would like to be sure that they are safe. Mrs. Webster hesitated for a long time before giving him Cheryl's address, but she eventually handed him a piece of paper and said, I'm going with you. No matter how much Billy argued, his mother wouldn't give him the address. She said she would show him the street and the house if he took her with him. So they had to go to Cheryl's together. Billy had already imagined an old house on the outskirts of the city, her father in an old jacket, shabby walls and furniture. But strangely enough, they arrived at an elite neighbourhood. Approaching a solid mansion, Mrs. Webster and Billy began to look for the right house. Hey, what are you looking for over there? Shouted the guard. If you came to apply for a job, the nanny has already been hired. You're too late. We're here for Cheryl Coleman, Billy said. Do you have an appointment? The guard looked at them suspiciously. Before Billy could say anything, the door opened, and an elderly man and Cheryl came out. She froze for a second when she saw them. Then she tugged the man's hand. Dad, meet Billy. This is the man I told you about. He proposed to me, but I didn't dare to marry him without talking to you first. Mr. Coleman approached the young man and shook his hand. "Nice to meet you, Billy. Thank you for my daughter. I've been looking for her for 6 months, worried that something had happened to her. I hired detectives, but it was useless. They said there were no leads. I couldn't find peace anywhere, and then she came back on her own with my grandson. She says she wants to get married, but she's afraid I'll get angry again. But I should get angry. She's alive and well, and there's even a grandchild. I always dreamed of an heir. I'm just an old fool who lives at work, spinning around all day and not seeing anything around me. And what do I need all this wealth for if there's no one dear to me nearby? Get married. I bless you. I want to rest a little. I'll help raise my grandchild. You'll be my assistant. I wouldn't trust anyone else, but I trust you. You're a good guy." Billy, stunned by everything that was happening, looked only at Cheryl. "So you agree?" "Yes," the woman replied, and she threw herself into his arms. And Billy's mother stood there, happy and content. That was her son. What a good man. He helped a poor, unfortunate woman in distress, and it turned out she was like a princess. Miracles do happen.